Point of order, this hearing a roundtable. This is a public roundtable being conducted by the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I am Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Committee of the Whole and Chair of the Council. Today is Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. The time is 3:19 in the afternoon. And this roundtable is being conducted virtually. It is being broadcast live via the chairman's website, which is www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. Again, www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. And it will be available, it's being recorded and will be available on the council's website, which is www.dccouncil.us. The subject of this hearing is vacant and blighted properties in the District of Columbia. The Committee of the Whole has not had a hearing on this issue since late last spring. And this has been a consistent problem for a number of years in the district. That is the existence of vacant properties, but more than that, the enforcement of the tax law concerning vacant property. Research consistently shows that vacant and blighted properties have myriad negative effects on the surrounding areas, including reductions in the value of nearby homes and increases in crime. Current data from the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs suggests that there are nearly 3,400 vacant and blighted properties in the district, many of which have been vacant or blighted for years. The purpose of this roundtable is to receive testimony from invited witnesses and question Dcra on their enforcement of the district vacant and blighted building or property law. Let me say a little bit more. So as I just said, vacant and blighted property is a problem. It has a negative effect on the neighborhood and on various quality of life issues such as crime. We distinguish in the law between vacant and blighted property. Vacant property is property that obviously is not being occupied. That is, it's not being occupied by a business or a parking lot or by residents. And is generally maintained. Blighted property is property that's not only vacant, but in fact is in worse condition, such as a house that is boarded up or a house that is partially collapsed. Those would be examples of blighted properties. One of our tools being the government's tool, what the council has enacted as policy to incentivize putting vacant and blighted property back into use, is to tax those properties at a higher rate. So the tax rate for residential property is something like 85 cents per $100. And for commercial property, something like $1.61 per $100 valuation. But for vacant property, it's $5. So that's more than 5 times the residential rate. And for blighted property, it's $10 per $100 assessed value. With that kind of taxation, property owners are generally incentivized to put their property back into use. But if properties that are vacant are not classified as vacant, they won't be taxed as vacant. And it's necessary that DCRA follow up when it classifies a property as vacant so that the chief financial officer will actually bill the property at the vacant property rate or at the blighted property rate. And that's not been happening. We have 6 witnesses before we have 4 witnesses before we get to government. And I want to note that the record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. It will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, February 8th. The committee welcomes testimony and comments and suggestions from the public with regard to vacant property. We have, over the past year, checked out a number of vacant properties that were suggested to us. And so I can't emphasize enough that if somebody knows of a vacant property, and we especially like, and I say that sarcastically, we especially like blighted properties, let us know and we will check it out. Because more often than not, what we find is that it slipped through the cracks and is not being taxed properly to incentivize it being put back into use. I'm going to turn to colleagues, see if they have statements, and then I'll turn to the witnesses. Councilmember Bonds, were you here first?
Yes, I was. Yes, prior to your being here. But thank you very much, Chairman. And this is a very important hearing. It gives us an opportunity to learn what has been done to improve the conditions in the community. Yes, the bottom line issue is tax dollars that we can use to vote to programming within our government and within our city. But I think one of the biggest areas of concern that I find in communities is how do we get rid of this unsightfulness? How do we get rid of these collapsing structures that may in fact endanger the public? The other side of the issue is how do we get rid of these properties that sometimes find squatters and illegal activities. So I'm very curious as to what we are doing different from the last couple of years so that the inventory can be reduced. And so I look to hearing from the agency on what they're doing, but I certainly want to learn any ideas that the public has through our ANCs in particular. So thank you very much, Chairman, for an opportunity to join this important hearing today.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Lewis George, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, I'll be very brief because I'm between here and the Transportation Environment Committee. So thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for making time to speak with us today. I'm here today because I continue to be concerned sort of with DCRA's management of vacant and blighted properties. Just this past Sunday, we had a shooting in a neighborhood with multiple vacant and blighted properties that my office had previously requested DCRA support with. I'm thinking about the 3700 block of 14th Street Northwest, specifically, but 1402 Quincy Street and 1410 Quincy Street Northwest for public safety related issues. When no action is taken, it allows crime and violence to fester and make everyone unsafe. And we need this system to work. Just this morning, I drove from the unit block of Kennedy Street all the way to Georgia Avenue. And I still witnessed a number of vacant properties and vacant blighted properties. Somewhere it indicated they had almost a yard sign that said the abatement team had been there, but those yard signs have been there now for 2 years. And so I really want to find out, once the abatement team comes out, what happens besides putting that yard sign there, and what actions have been taken since those yard signs were placed. The number of vacant and blighted properties on Kennedy Street continues to be a persistent problem. And also contributes to public safety issues. I'm glad today you'll hear from some of our commissioners. I see Commissioner Speck and Commissioner Brooks, who are commissioners who have talked about a number of properties in their communities, and they'll talk about their specific experiences as well. They've been through this a lot lately, and I'm grateful for their leadership as we try to clear this up and get the new Department of Building started on the right foot. I know when we've been up here before, DCRA sometimes places the blame for delays with other agencies. That's why I'm particularly glad to have representatives from the OCFO with us today to help triangulate the flow of money in response to known violations. So thank you again, Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for holding today's roundtable, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses and having an opportunity to ask questions directly to DCRA. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis George. So I'm going to invite in Randy Speck, who's a commissioner with ANC 34G, Chuck Elkins, who's a commissioner with ANC 3D, Carla Lewis, who's an ANC commissioner with ANC 5E, Tripti Patel, who's a commissioner, ANC commissioner with ANC 2A, and April Erickson, who was invited by Councilmember Nadeau, I believe. And we'll have a clock. You can see it on your screen, should be in the top row. It's set for 5 minutes. We'll leave it there. We have few enough witnesses that I won't be too strict on the time. In fact, I think Commissioner Speck, your testimony might be longer than 5 minutes. And as long as you keep moving along, it's fine. And you are first. So why don't you proceed?
I am going to try to keep my testimony to 5 minutes, Chairman Mendelson. Thank you very much for holding this hearing. I presented this testimony to our commission last night, and the commission approved it unanimously. So this is on behalf of both myself and the commission. Our commission testified on this same topic at the committee's May 25th, 2021 roundtable hearing. The testimony updates our review of several properties in our ANC that commissioners and constituents identified as vacant and blighted, and discusses our effort to work with the Department of of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs on a pilot program to improve its procedures. We've relied on the most recently available DCRA and OTR online databases in this testimony. Now, I go through the individual properties, there are 7 of them that we have been following for some time in our ANC, and I got detailed information about all of those. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have about any individual property, but I'm just going to skip now to what we've done in the pilot program and then some conclusions that we've reached based on our experience. In late May 2021, Commissioner Chuck Elkins and I proposed to the DCRA Director Chopra that it conduct a pilot project with ANC 34G to identify vacant and blighted properties and any obstacles to restoring them to occupancy and propose steps that could improve DCRA's processes for handling such properties. DCRA first gave us a list of 68 properties in our ANC, and its records indicated that they were vacant. Our commissioners went through the list and found that the vast majority of the properties that DCRA thought were vacant were either occupied or under active construction. For my single member district, DCRA listed 10 properties as vacant. Of those, 4 were unequivocally occupied. One house was apparently occupied, and one house had actually been razed in 2016 and replaced by 2 other houses. These properties may have been vacant temporarily during construction, but none of them should have been listed as vacant in DCRA's records. Of the remaining 4 houses, I had asked DCRA to inspect 3 of them. So 3 of them came from my initiative. DCRA identified only 1 additional house that appeared to be vacant. That house was listed on the DCRA's website as vacant, but had been granted an exemption for a hardship. I happen to know the situation there, and that's probably justified. Commissioner Elkins and I reported these findings to DCRA along with our analysis of the relevant records. DCRA's online records were often internally inconsistent and did not agree with OTR's records. We had a few meetings with DCRA's designated representative, Chief Executive Officer Tiffany Crow, and on July 23rd, 2021, we provided our ideas for approaches to address the issues we had identified. In September 2021, DCRA advised us that it would be working on revising its vacant and blighted properties program internally, that it would not address internal issues with us, and that the pilot effort was terminated. Commissioner Elkins' testimony summarizes what we learned from this truncated pilot project and where we identified areas for improvements. And here are the conclusions that we reached. First, based on the 7 blighted and vacant properties that we identified and the pilot program. DCRA's data systems in 2021 could not systematically identify vacant and blighted properties. And it is reactive, conducting inspections only in response to complaints. DCRA needs a program, perhaps by using the ANCs, to solicit information on vacant and blighted properties and conduct timely investigations. It should consult with and use information from residents and ANC commissioners to inform those investigations. And it should provide timely, substantive feedback to ANC commissioners on the results of inspections. It should be a collaborative process between the ANCs, the community, and DCRA to make vacant and blighted properties habitable and occupied and not cause adverse impacts to the neighborhood in the meantime. Second, DCRA's actions to trigger higher property taxes through OTR can motivate owners to restore vacant properties to the market for occupancy. We saw instances when DCRA's designation of a property as vacant or blighted was clearly a factor in restoring the property to use. Some owners will only be spurred to action when they receive a tax bill that is 6 or 10 times the residential rate. And DCRA and OTR should use that tool whenever warranted. DCRA continues to permit owners to use a succession of bogus construction permits to avoid vacant tax rates. DCRA should conduct regular inspections and include those inspection reports on its public databases to determine whether construction work is actually being undertaken pursuant to the permit, and revoke permits or deny extensions when the property remains vacant and no work has been done. The incentive of vacant property tax could stimulate owners to complete permitted work. Fourth, DCRA's focus should be on creating incentives that encourage owners to correct blighted properties and to occupy vacant properties. DCRA should promptly identify and impose financial penalties on vacant and blighted properties rather than imposing higher taxes retroactively. Otherwise, the owners may incur overwhelming tax burdens before they can take corrective action. We've seen that in one instance, at least, delay actual work on the house. Fifth, the council should consider changes to the criteria for when a property is vacant or blighted to ensure clarity and consistency and to facilitate enforcement. Whether the council initiates changes or not, DCRA should issue implementing regulations that spell out in its standards for what constitutes vacant or blighted property. The standards need to be specific and enforceable, and inspectors will need to be trained to apply these standards rigorously. Our experience suggests that forceful DCRA action in coordination with OTR can encourage property owners to rectify their vacant or blighted properties. In order to be effective, however, DCRA must improve its ability to identify these properties, maintain thorough, accurate, publicly available records, and follow through to ensure that any exemptions granted are fully warranted. Reducing the number of vacant and blighted properties will address both the district's acute housing shortage and negative impact these properties have on neighborhoods. We urge the council and the mayor to take steps that will restore our existing housing stock to productive use. This existing housing stock could contribute to expanding available affordable housing. While we have only examined the vacant and blighted housing properties in our ANC, there are also vacant and blighted commercial properties that warrant council's attention. Thank you, and I'm sorry I've gone over time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly endorse everything that Commissioner Speck has said, and I would like, if you don't mind, to share my screen here because I've reduced my recommendations to a number of slides to try to get through them quickly. I'm going to take a slightly different approach just to give you some different view of our work on this. One caveat before I start, we've not had a chance to sit down with DCRA and discuss our concerns in detail through no fault of theirs, and therefore our recommendations may change once we know more. Let me see if I can get this into a slideshow, just a second. So I want to go through a number of what I would call weaknesses and see what we might suggest. First of all, with regard to the objectives of the program, it does seem that DCRA appears to have a less aggressive objective for this program than we would set. And just to lay out what I think would make sense to us, first of all, accurately identifying all vacant and blighted properties. Secondly, doing everything it can to bring these properties back into productive use as soon as possible. And then, and this is important, while these properties remain vacant or blighted, making best efforts to mitigate the adverse effects on the neighborhoods. Now, as you've remind many witnesses, the council doesn't run this program or any of these other programs. The council can only perform oversight. But the question we would raise is, how can the council perform oversight without the right performance data? And of course, performance data is important because it can drive the actual performance. I think Director Shrapa has rightly been congratulated on how well he has set performance standards for his department and gotten his staff to move their performance to try to get good grades on these performance standards. And what I want to suggest is now time to move to a phase 2 of that program, in which these performance standards are carefully analyzed in terms of whether they drive the program in the right direction, and if not, to change them. We certainly want the new Department of Buildings to have performance standards that drive it toward the achievement of the kind of program objectives I've just suggested. So weakness number 2 is identification of these properties. If DCRA doesn't know about a vacant or blighted property, of course it can't do anything about it. And therefore this identification is key. But as already been discussed, their list currently is not accurate, it's incomplete and out of date. And so what would we like to know in terms of performance of the program to sort of help us know whether it's performing well? Well, I would suggest a number of properties newly identified by complainants. Keep in mind, this is a complaint-driven program. I'm not sure it should always be. And the number identified by DCRA. Perhaps DCRA ought to drive through the neighborhoods just as the council member did today. Secondly, the number of properties removed from the list because they are no longer vacant or blighted, confirmed by an inspection and notification to the ANC so they can check that out. Weakness number 3, exemptions. Exemptions can act, of course, as a big loophole in the program if they're not administered rigorously. So what would we like to know? Well, how about how many exemption requests are rejected by DCRA for failure to meet the criteria or to meet the vacant building maintenance standard? That vacant building maintenance standard is particularly important to the neighborhood. And how many exemptions are terminated early because DCRA has determined that the criteria are no longer met, or that the owner has failed to continue to meet the building maintenance standards, or because of fraud. Tax rate discrepancies. As we know, they don't always match up between OTR and DCRA. So what it would be helpful to know is what is the average number of days that pass between the classification of DCRA of a property as vacant or blighted and the day the increased tax rate is imposed by OTR. Now, I realize the DCRA would probably not like to have their performance graded by how another agency is performing, but if they're not doing an adequate job, then these data need to be brought to everybody's attention. Perhaps the council and the agency can do something about it. Number 5 is adverse impacts on the neighborhoods. This is, of course, why a lot of people complain about vacant or blighted properties. And as we know, as you stated, Mr. Chairman, these often cause serious impacts on the neighborhood, and they go unmitigated in many cases. So what we would like to know is how many legitimate complaints about a property being a nuisance has DCRA received, and how many of these legitimate complaints has DCRA been unable to mitigate within 30 days, and why? Now, DCRA might say that mitigation of all these problems would be a big strain on their budget, and that, well, may be true. But if DCRA needs a bigger budget to deal with the mitigation, that is, they can document this in a concrete way. The council can decide how and whether to respond. The weakness number 6 is work with the owners. As we have seen, some of these owners, for whatever reason, do not appear to act to bring their properties into productive use despite these high tax rates. So what would we like to know about those people? Well, how many properties have been on the list for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and that have now, through the action of either DCRA or others in the government or the owner himself, been removed from the list because they are now in productive use? And what are the most prominent apparent reasons that properties continue to be kept out of productive use? If we can find out, maybe we'll find that we need to take additional additional steps. I think DCRA would find it troubling that they would be graded to some extent by how the owners are responding, but quite frankly, isn't that the elephant in the room? We want these properties returned to productive use, and if our program isn't moving them to that effect, we need to know that and why. It may be the performance of DCRA, it might be other factors related to the owners and something else that we could do. And finally, not asking the community for help. There's a lot of untapped energy out in the community to fix these vacant and blighted properties. And what I would suggest would be helpful to know is how many ANCs or civic groups receive at least quarterly reports from DCRA of what properties are vacant or blighted in their jurisdiction, which properties have been declared returned to productive use, which complaints have been rejected, and what mitigation steps have been taken. Excuse me. Our pilot showed that a lot can be accomplished in a short time when the ANC and DCRA work together. Now, the fact is that DCRA did spend considerable resources working with that pilot, and I think they would feel that they cannot do this for the other ANCs. That may well be a good budget decision, looked at just from their own resources, but it really undercuts the ability of the program to be a success. If this department needs more resources, it can quantify how much and let the council decide what to do. This list of properties needs to be brought up to date. A good way to do that is with ANCs. It may cost a little bit more money, but if the DCRA doesn't know about the property, it's not going to do anything about it. So thank you. Those are my slides.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carla Lewis.
Yes, I am here.
Please
Good
proceed.
afternoon. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and the Committee of the Whole members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you again about the vacant and blighted properties in or surrounding my single-member district that residents have repeatedly raised concerns about. I must say that I find that it's unfortunate that I'm appearing before you for the second year in a row to raise concerns about some of the same properties that I have testified about last year. My testimony is exactly the same because nothing has changed. I am here to bring to your attention several vacant blighted properties within my single-member district, which that myself and my constituents have raised concerns about with multiple DC agencies. My hope is that today that the council will not only take note, but take action to stop these property owners from holding on to vacant properties while there still remains such a deficit in housing within DC. It is also to draw attention to the problems that they are causing for residents. Residents are scared to pass by certain areas. These vacant properties are being used as encampments for drug activity, and this is selling, buying, and using, and resulting in crowding, obstructing, and incommoding on public space. And last but not least, it's a health hazard to residents in the area, as it often results in people urinating and defecating on the homes of the residents that live nearest to these vacant and blighted properties. And it's also attracting trash, which is, the trash is attracting and harboring rats. These issues can no longer be ignored by the DC government. The drug activity is resulting in violence, and action needs to be taken before another life is lost. I said this last year, and since last year, we have lost even 2 more lives. The first property that I would like to bring to your attention is 1600 North Capitol Street, Northwest. I just don't understand how someone can buy a property and go for more than 15 years without any type of development. Some type of legislation needs to be created in order to prevent developers from holding on to such properties. If they do not want to build, then they should sell and give somebody else the opportunity to build, because people need housing. This, I testified the number of times they've had extension, and they even received, to my knowledge, 1 more extension due to COVID. It's ridiculous. And nothing has been done. Absolutely nothing has been done to this property for 15 years. The next property I'd like to bring to your attention is 200 Rhode Island Avenue, Northwest. Residents testified that this property was in such shape, the roof has caved in, the roof has fallen in. There has been some upkeep around the property, but the property is still blighted and it's harboring rats. And the residents are not happy about the fact that, you know, there are rats all over the property. There are also 10 Q Street, 8 Q Street, I think, 10, 12, and 14 Q Street, Northwest, which recently there was a stabbing and murder that occurred over in that property. So those were the properties that I spoke about. Oh, 234 Florida Avenue, Northwest. There's been no development. This is supposed to be a cafe. The owner comes from Virginia to grow fruit and vegetables on the property, but nothing has been done to open or expand that business or anything to that business. In addition to those properties, there are several other properties, and I agree with the commissioners that have spoken before me with regards to the fact that there is no way to really find out the status of vacant properties, and there needs to be a better system at hand to identify these properties. But there's a property at 38 Florida Avenue Northwest, and residents are concerned about rats being in that vacant property. At 78 Randolph Place Northwest, residents are stating that since people know that it's empty, the kids, you know, in the summertime, they hang out there and they throw firecrackers at the neighbors in the area. And in the back of the property, people are parking by the parking lot and blocking the alley, so it's a nuisance. 14 Quincy Place Northwest. This is being taxed at a residential 1 rate and also with homestead, and it's been vacant for a few years. People are using that particular property. At first, the homeless were sleeping right in front of the property. They had put a mattress out there at one point, and they were sleeping in the front of the property. And drug transactions are happening there on a regular basis. 92 R Street Northwest. This property has been vacant for about 5 years. The rodents were taking over the front yard and running into neighbors' yards. There was a bush that was not managed. Neighbors took matters into their own hands and cut down the bush so the Department of Health could treat the property for rodents, because it was really that much out of control. And 122 Randolph Place Northwest. I understand that the owner occupant passed away and it's been vacant, and people again are finding rats coming in and out of the place, and there's problems with the roof and weeds growing all over the property. So those are just a short list, and I know that there are many more properties in my single member district that requires some attention, but these properties are causing more problems. I'm just so upset about the fact that we have had, I think, at least 3 murders since my last testimony. These properties are drawing the wrong type of attention. People that are homeless are going there because they know that there is no one there. They're staying in these properties, and other activities follow behind it as well. So this year, I am really hoping that something will be done, that some type of legislation will be enacted by this committee that will prevent these owners of these properties from holding on to these properties for year in and year out without doing any type of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't have a copy of your statement. Did you submit it?
I did not, but I will submit it.
Please, because I didn't write down all the addresses and I would like to follow up with regard to them.
Yes, please. I would like you to follow up with those two. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Trupti Patel from ANC 2A.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson. How are you today?
Fine, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. And I did send my testimony right before the hearing, so I don't know if, okay, good. Good afternoon, Chairperson Mendelson. I'm Trupti Patel, ANC Commissioner 2A03. At your request, I am submitting testimony to update you about vacant and blighted properties in my SMD, which is the historic Foggy Bottom. For years, constituents have identified, complained, and have submitted to the process for handling vacant and blighted properties. One of the former vacant and blighted properties, which has now been has been bought and renovated, has a rather infamous claim to fame. 2507 I Street Northwest was the site where a neighbor who suffered from substance abuse broke into the property where she thought she was going to have a safe place to come down from a drug vendor. Instead, it's where she was discovered dead hours/days later. Official cause of death was listed as a drug overdose. This was in December of 2019. And if the frustration and anger with DCRA wasn't at an all-time high, it reached apocalyptic levels after this incident. DCR representatives met with myself, residents, as well as the mayor's office. I honestly can't blame the frustration of the residents displayed towards DCRA. Residents have directly expressed to DCRA that their processes are inefficient and pose a true threat to their physical and emotional well-being. There's no sense of transparency or urgency to address these concerns. It's continually why DCRA gets tagged as the worst agency to work with. I'd like DCRA to treat ANCs as partners versus adversaries. Honestly, the fact that I have to come testify more than once before you should be considered an embarrassment to DCRA. Now, the second infamous property, yeah, I may not have a ton in my SMD, but boy, are they doozies. This one is 2505 I Street. When I last testified before you in May of 2021, I told you about a gas leak that was thankfully caught in time. Had it not been for someone calling 911 for the strong sense of gas in the neighborhood in a timely manner, that dispatch call would have been instead for an explosion that would have impacted several houses and a very real possibility for the loss of life. The current property owner has never been held accountable for their responsibility. In fact, it's become an issue of this owner knowingly being able to exploit and leverage favorability due to knowing the rules and regulations to outsmart DCRA. My two properties are so famous that they were featured in the Washington Post. Now, while I like to be cool enough to get a shout out from them, that wasn't the way I wanted to get cool points. However, it did get some much needed attention to vacant and blighted properties, but yet not much has been changed. I've done walkthroughs with government officials and all of us are on the same page of not being informed on what is happening. No status reports or progress reports. I have residents to answer to as well as you do, Chairman, and I'd like to have answers that provide direct, honest, and authentic answers on timelines and how we don't stay in this cycle of having properties impacting the quality of life for neighbors. These properties can be converted ideally to safe and affordable housing? How can we as a city encourage people to reside here if, number one, we don't have anywhere for them to live because the issue is now starting to make us look like we don't have our act together? Number two, we can solve this desperate need for housing by making these properties livable and have neighbors who can be homeowners. We can't achieve these goals if this DCRA refuses to be an agency that works with us and for us. This agency doesn't have to continue to be the worst agency and seen as being obstructionist. Well, I do appreciate the opportunity to provide you feedback about these issues. This isn't the ideal way I'd like to see you, Chairman, but I do look forward to working with you on solving these issues. And before I close, Chairman, I do want to just say, I thought Commissioner Speck was very thorough along with Commissioner Elkins in providing constructive feedback and possible solutions to the problem. And, I suffer the same sentiments that Commissioner Lewis had expressed. I mean, it's nowhere near as, terrible in my SMD, but the issues that she's raising, their sense of urgency is very palpable, because these are the reasons why there's a lot of anxiety and anger with my constituents, because, they don't want to be in a situation where we're having to call the police around, somebody once again passing away or for a possible murder or increased crime in the area, which are all of the things that I've suffered from with having vacant and blighted properties. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Then we have one more witness, April Erickson.
Good afternoon. First, thank you to the committee and to the chair for allowing me to speak under last minute conditions. I actually just found out that I could speak yesterday, so I was busily trying to put together notes for today. So I will share with you, and I want to thank Councilmember Nadal for allowing to advocate on my part. So this is a summary that I provided to her. I am different from what I'm advocating for the other council members and neighborhood members, because I do support this bill, but however, it's personally affecting me in a way that I'd never expected. So I am a unicorn. I have been living the American dream from growing up in a single parent home in the projects of New York to becoming a middle-class DC homeowner with an investment property. This has provided me the hope that I'll have a financial legacy to honor my honor roll middle school daughter. I'm an internationally known full-time federal employee at NASA, and I'm probably one of the few African-American women with a PhD in aerospace mechanical engineering. Yes, a real rocket scientist that resides in the district. I've given so much time and energy to the city, our country, its youth. I have been inducted into the DC Hall of Fame of Science, Technology, and Education. And for 30 years, I've been a contributing DC US citizen. I've been a volunteer guest speaker, educator, board member, and former Banneker and Sage Patchell baseball, softball coach, volunteer coach, and run a nonprofit youth STEM organization in DC. I volunteer all this time to our community, the DMV, the US, and the world. And it's not just limited to the activities I mentioned, but I'm an advocate for diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility in the STEM disciplines. Basically, Google me and you'll get a lot of information. One of the things that I'm most proud of is I lead a nonprofit STEM youth chapter called the DMV Nesby Jr. organization. That stands for Dynamic Mathematical Visionaries, National Society of Black Engineers. It services 100 plus K through 12 scholars in the DMV. The learning is a beautiful sight to behold. All my life, I've helped students, parents, and seniors. I'm helping that someone can help me. I seek your support and advocacy for an extension to my submission to the DCRA for a vacant property tax exemption. My home and my property, rental property, are both located in LeDroit Park. Several years ago, the rental property had a fire that was caused by Howard University students that were renting. I was a dutiful, giving landlord. I provide a safe haven to so many students, with many of them owing me money at the end of the semester or school year. My tax statements document those losses. This unfortunate event has disrupted my life and my ability to pay my bills and pay for my daughter's education. Insurance, since the property is historic, 110 plus years, the insurance company prorates the full value and provides this to the lender. Therefore, the bank has only received 60% of the money upfront, and I can only receive the full value of expected renovation at cost if I put the money up myself. Since the property is under construction, it has gone from approximately $6K to $55K per year in taxes. That's larger than my mortgage. I've applied to the DCRA blight hardship and successfully been accepted several times through the various exemptions that they allow. However, I have to express that with COVID, personal illness, weather, there have been numerous slowdown issues coupled with the historic property that has caused the work to take longer than expected. With such difficulty, shouldn't there be a consideration for this difficult period we are in? I'm struggling to pay the construction costs largely upfront, as well as limited release of the funds from the bank lender. It's been stressful, nightmarish, but I'm determined to leave this property as a financial asset to my middle school daughter. I must say that I have been very happy to have the help from the DCRA office. They've been very pleasant. They've been always welcoming. They've helped me to understand all of the rules and regulations. But I must say that I've done everything in my power to comply, to hire the appropriate architects, contractors, projects managers to get the job well. I've even done work in the past on the house myself. The work is now 65% completion, and I've no way dragged my feet. I'm a 34 plus year resident and a contributing member to DC. So many of the positive contributions through this upkeep of the DC property will affect me if I'm required to pay this higher tax. I'll just give you a quick example. What's occurring is because of this effect to my escrow, my homeowner, my loan is now renegotiating the finances that I'm receiving. I will not pay my house off until I'm 98 years old because of the impact of these taxes. There must be some way that residents that are compliant to these issues can be helped. And so I implore the committee to consider how you can help someone like myself, who, if I have to take on extra jobs as I have, will affect the impact that I have to our youth. Thank you for allowing me for the time today.
Thank you, Dr. Erickson. I don't have a copy of your statement. If you could provide that, please.
Definitely. Like I said, I just found out, like I've been typing feverishly to get this written up.
But we could take a look at it and then see if how we could be helpful.
And thank you. I've lived here so long to see the properties slowly move from blight and vacant to better communities and neighborhoods. But my situation is a little different. And so I'm advocating for some other kind of consideration.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you to each of the witnesses. I have a few questions and then I'll turn to colleagues. Commissioner Patel. Before this hearing, I looked up in the tax records about 2507 I Street, and it's listed as its tax classification is vacant. Would you say that that property is vacant or blighted? The property next door, 2505, is being assessed as or classified as blighted.
That assessment is correct. So that property is considered vacant because they are in the process of remodeling it. So they haven't had a chance to finish the renovation to bring people in to start living. I have talked to the owners and the construction folks. And I mean, they've actually run into some problems with getting some of their specs cleared due to COVID. So they've hit a slowdown. But I know that this person, the gentleman who bought the property, has been trying to do his best to, make sure it is something that, will alleviate the neighbors' concerns. This will be something that will be inhabited. So that assessment you've received for DCRA is correct.
That's for 2507 vacant as opposed to blighted.
Correct, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Lewis, I'm at a disadvantage because I don't have your statement. You said you would provide it. The properties that you cited, are they assessed as vacant or blighted, or are they assessed as occupied?
They're not, they're assessed as occupied, some of them, yes. Some of them are vacant, but I know in particular, 214 Q Street. That one is occupied. In fact, I noted that it had residential and they also had a homestead.
And your testimony is that it's vacant,
Yes,
like, I want to say 1600 North Capitol.
yes.
Is that classified as vacant or?
It is now vacant for years. It went for almost, I want to say 13 years, being taxed at a commercial rate before we finally were able to get them taxed at a vacant rate. And the same with 200 Rhode Island Avenue. When I last testified, it was, I guess it was being taxed at a commercial rate and not vacant. And I believe DCRA did change that to vacant.
Okay.
But
Because that's part of it. You know, I think you testified that you would like us to pass some legislation to fix this problem.
Mhm.
We cannot require a property owner to occupy their property, but we can create a financial incentive where they will not leave it vacant or especially blighted. And that's the challenge here, is not the legislation, but the enforcement. And that's the value of this hearing, is to identify these properties and what DCRA is or is not doing with regard to them.
but it's not working. If this owner has been able to hold on to the property for 15 years without doing anything at all, then whatever legislation there is not working.
Well, yes, but that's because DCRA is not classifying it properly, and therefore it's not being taxed at the higher rate. And so the legislation isn't working because it's not being complied with.
For
That's,
the last maybe 2 years, it's being taxed at the vacant lot rate, but yet there's still no development. And what saddens me is that there's development happening everywhere around this one particular place. I mean, in Noma, everywhere there's development happening, but not here.
you're talking about at Florida and North Capitol?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. I mean, buildings are going up all over the neighborhood, but yet in this particular area, nothing has been done.
I will send us your statement, please, and we will look at it more carefully.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes, no, that would be very helpful. Commissioner Speck, I wanted to ask you about two things. 6005 Utah.
Yes.
You had that in your written statement, but you didn't say much about it. I
No.
think that property, a year ago, you met with an inspector who was unwilling to go around to the back.
Right. I don't know whether the reclassification as vacant had an impact on the owner or not, but the owner has then sold the property and sold it to a development company. They came in and cleaned it up substantially. All of the debris and the overgrowth in the backyard has been taken out. They've replaced all the windows. They have a construction permit pending. It's not been granted yet, at least according to the records. But there's been some movement there, and it was clearly a result of our identifying that house and having DCRA finally listed as vacant. It's been vacant for 30 years, but they finally listed it as vacant. The tax increased on it, and the owner took action. They sold the property to a developer.
It should have been classified as blighted, but it wasn't.
It should have been, yes.
Can you just say a little bit more, even though you may not want to, about when you met with the inspector there?
It was a very brief meeting, and it seemed to me that he was not, as long as the house was not boarded up. In fact, that's what he told me. He said, unless it's boarded up, I can't classify it as blighted. He said that his supervisor would tell him that won't hold up, and that it won't be classified as blighted. It wouldn't stand up.
You realize that's not what the law says.
I realize it very well. That's not what the law says.
And didn't you try to get the inspector to go around to the rear of the house?
I did.
And he was unwilling to?
He said it's not necessary. The house is not blighted because it's not boarded up.
Okay. Tell me about the two properties that Cornelius Donnelly has.
Both of those properties have been vacant for at least 5 or 6 years. And they have been the subject of repeated construction permits that have been issued, but no work at all has been done. And this has gone on for years and years and years now. The neighbors are really concerned about the property. It's not as overgrown as it has been in the past. And as a result of the inspections that I requested, the owner has done a little bit of cleanup in some of the areas. The backyard at the one on Nebraska is still a mess, but they've done some cleanup. They now have new construction permits that have given them an exemption again from the vacant property tax, and no work has been done. And there's no prospect for any work being done. So again, the owner is using the system, and DCRA is permitting him to use the system to avoid the higher tax rate. And really, this is a bad actor as far as I'm concerned, one that has repeatedly in the past avoided the higher tax rate by using what I call bogus construction permits.
I checked the tax records before I came down, it came to the hearing, and Morrison is classified as vacant for 2022.
Yes.
Residential or class 1 for 2021. Nebraska is still classified as class 1 every year through first half of 2022.
Correct.
And you say that's because of these permits?
That's the only explanation I could have for it, that there's an exemption. And one of them, I can't remember which one of them, or maybe both of them, have in DCRA's records, they are listed as exempt construction.
And is this in your SMD?
Yes, both of them are.
And the last time you checked, which was fairly recent?
It was this week or last week.
No work was being done.
No work was being done. I've checked also with the neighbors who say that there hasn't been any work there done at all.
Okay. Thank you. Let me go back to Commissioner Lewis. My staff gave me a list of the properties.
Yes.
200 Rhode Island Avenue is missing a roof.
They said that the roof caved in. This is
Well,
what
have
the
you
residents
seen that?
reported. I have not seen it, no. This is what's being reported to me by the residents that live nearby the property.
Okay. Very quickly, is 10 Q Street, what's the condition of the house?
Actually, I think 10, 12, and 14, these aren't in my single member district. They're across the street from my single member district, but these properties affect the residents that are in my single member district. And it's an empty lot, actually, I think. 10, 12, and 14. That there's supposed to be a development going up there. And there was an encampment there for during almost the entire time of the pandemic up into this summertime, I guess, just after.
Right, but you said it was an empty lot.
Yes.
What about 38 Florida?
38 Florida is a house.
What condition is it in?
The house is, I guess it's in good condition, but the gutters are overflowing and the owner is complaining that, water is dropping over onto his property and that there are always tons of mosquito and rats at that property.
Okay.
And they said it's vacant and over $38,000 of taxes are owed on that property.
What I'm trying to find out is just the condition of the property, get a sense of whether it's vacant or blighted. What about 14 Quincy?
14 Quincy is it's vacant. It's not blighted, but it's really a nuisance because the people are hanging out there doing drug transactions there all of the time.
92R?
92R Street is vacant. It's not blighted. No, now that the residents got rid of that bush that was causing an issue. But it's vacant property.
And what about 122 Randolph?
122 Randolph is vacant. And it's not blighted, even though they said the residents are reporting that there are cracks in the roof line, and again, there are overgrown weeds and things of that nature. Mhm.
Well, it might be that they are blighted, but I did want to get a sense. I'm definitely going to ask the director why 200 Rhode Island is classified as vacant if the roof is collapsed.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to my colleague, Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much to each of the witnesses today. My intention was to listen to your comments and then be prepared to speak with the director about how we are sort of mitigating some of these issues. But I must ask a couple of questions of you and I would like to start with Ms. Lewis. Thank you very much for this laundry list. I was able to record all of these addresses, and living in this community, I'm familiar with some of the locations. Thank you very much. And thank you for your diligence, because I can recall in my day of being a commissioner in this area, there were many vacant properties. And it sounds like we're still suffering from that condition. And I had hoped that we would, as a government, be light years ahead of this, because it is a sore spot with community. But more importantly, as you mentioned, it is the opportunity to not have affordable housing in a community when we know we need it. And so thank you very much for that. I did want to ask you a little bit about the timing from the time that you would have a complaint with the agency to the time that you get a response. Is it within weeks or days, or is it more like months?
I would say maybe weeks. It depends. It depends on the case. If we're just talking about vacant and blighted properties, it may take a couple of weeks.
Okay, and when that happens, that you get an inspector on the property, do they reach a decision quickly within, let's say, a week or so, and then you notice a reclassification, or is it something that happens on a quarterly or annual basis?
I don't know that I can answer that specifically. All I can say is that for the two properties that I have reported, the 1600 North Capitol Street Northwest, which we had also gotten the council member's office and the office of the Attorney General involved in that particular one, that one was done relatively quick, right? It's just sad that it took 13 years or so before it was done. The other property was 200 Rhode Island Avenue. And that happened that happened relatively quickly as well. I would say within a couple of months, it was reclassified.
Okay, all right. So the if we can get the agency to respond, we tend to get results pretty quickly. Let me ask you, I know that a few years ago.
Can I say something?
Sure, surely.
You said we can get results pretty quickly. The results are the reclassification, but there's nothing being done about that property not being vacant or blighted anymore. So what type of results are we looking for?
I appreciate that. Thank you very much for that statement, because it just seems to me, and here I go editorializing, but it just seems to me that if a property is vacant for 5 years, or in a blighted state for 5 years, that we need to, as a government, go further. And when I say go further, I mean, we really need to have a process in place where the property can then change hands. Because I've heard Dr. Erickson talk about her property and her concerns as she's trying to work with the government in order to make her condition better or more acceptable to community. But I see her issue as being an exception to the general rule. And I think we always will be able to handle the exceptions, but it concerns me that we continue to have a preponderance of vacant and blighted properties in these communities. And it seems like we're letting the condition continue as long as it's silent. In other words, if you don't have many residents or an acute situation, or an individual who's following up on these situations, it continues to stay in community. And so I'm trying to learn from the testimonies that I've heard today, how we as a government can go further to get the blight out of the community.
Okay. But if I may add one thing, Dr. Erickson case is an exception, but you have other exceptions as well. I know of a neighbor that was recently taken ill and went to go stay with her daughter while she was recovering, and another daughter was staying at her house. And then that daughter had gotten ill and went to go stay with her son, leaving the property vacant because no one is there. 2 people were ill, and they even had a tragedy that occurred in the family where one of the sisters was shot. So they're in, this is not good times for them, right? And they probably could not afford to pay $30,000, and they would lose that home. And as you know, this has happened to so many residents, long-term residents in DC.
Yes.
So we have to be careful with regards to how this is crafted.
Very good wisdom. Thank you very much for that. You're right. And I have neighbors that have had hardships and have come to this kind of conclusion also. So I understand what you're saying. I'm also trying to figure out through your testimony and through the testimony of Mr. Spick and others, how we can do a better job of managing this situation. Clearly, the agency has not shown that it has the volume of workers that can sort of check the status of dwelling units in each community. And I'm just wondering what role the ANC can play that would improve this process. It just seems to me we're leaving our commissioners out. You come forward and you testify, you share, but you don't have a real formal role in trying to improve the situation. And I'm so hoping that our commissioners will be activated in a very formal way to be concerned about the condition in the neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate, the inclusion of commissioners. But one thing that can be used as a red flag would be the Board of Zoning and the BZA and how many extensions are being granted to these developers. That can be used as a red flag as well. The agencies need to talk to one another.
I appreciate that. Mr. Speck, is that some of your thinking as well?
Oh, absolutely. The ANCs, I think, are the eyes and ears of lots of DC agencies, and they should be used much more extensively. And I appreciated the DCRA's willingness to have that pilot program with us. I think that was very helpful. I'm sorry that it got sort of cut off before we could conclude, but that clearly was a step in the right direction to try to work with the ANCs and see how we can identify the properties and then take action, make sure that DCRA takes action, then that will hopefully bring them back to a habitable state.
Oh, and so I just want to ask you, so do you see the division of DCRA, the creation of this Department of Buildings in embellishing or enhancing the opportunity to get a handle on this situation in neighborhoods?
Yes, it's certainly an opportunity. I hope that they're going to take advantage of it. A lot of the things relate to data collection and data management to make sure that you've got the information right. And that's going to take some effort, and it may take some additional people, but that needs to be done so that we can all have confidence in the records. Right now, you can't really have confidence in their records.
I appreciate that. On the note of having the data, I certainly would like to see the commissioners knowing more about the rental units within their single member district. And because when we talk to DCRA, the entity, they have no real clue. And I think that too can help us as we're thinking about the new department and the importance of its role. Yes, Chairman, thank you. Thank you so very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lewis George.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for your testimony. And it's amazing to see sort of the themes across the testimonies. I think you have a whole panel who really highlighted all of the sort of weaknesses that we have here. Commissioner Elkins Speck, why did your pilot program end? Like, what happened? Why did it end?
Chuck, you want to respond to that?
Well, we had proposed this pilot in order not just to see what the listings were and whether they were accurate or not, but then to be able to have some interaction with the department about the mitigation of the adverse effects, et cetera. And I think the department has to speak for itself, but the impression I got was that they did learn, of course, that their list was in terrible shape and it needed to be fixed, and that they didn't really want to discuss with us how they were running the rest of the program. They made it clear in an email that they were not going to discuss internal matters with us. And so we essentially had to terminate it. I do think that if commissioners were involved, or the commissions were involved, that they could make a big difference in keeping an eye on these properties. I think we live in these neighborhoods and we see these houses every day or every week, and that's more than DCRA.
So let me how long did it take you all? You had to sort of explain to me what you did, because I mean, if nothing else, we could do it in Ward 4 for ANC commissioners until DCRA does it right. We could just do it across the commissions, and we could meet with each chair. Brandy already has a relationship with all of our chairs, but we could do it. So you got, what'd you get? You got the list of vacant and blighted properties in your SMD, and then you also got the the list of tax sort of a list of where they were being, how they were being taxed? What else did you need to be able to perform it?
What we got was just a list.
Okay.
I think there's 68 properties in our entire ANC, and just my single member district. And all of the commissioners then went out and looked at those properties, every one of them. And we found that it was just riddled with errors. There were a lot of properties that they thought were vacant, and in fact, they weren't. So it took a lot of time, actually. I mean, just in my SMD, I spent an entire day going around to all these houses and trying to figure out what the situation was. Then they didn't give us the information about the tax status. We had to then go to the records, go to their internal records, DCRA's records, to look for exemptions, for how they were classified by DCRA, and then go to OTR records as well to see whether they matched. And for the 10 properties that were in my SMD, I provided a spreadsheet that lists the records that we looked at and whether they were consistent between DCRA records and even internally within DCRA. There was several instances when their own internal records were inconsistent. And then we went to OTR and there were inconsistencies there as well. So all of that was a significant amount of effort. It's not something that DCRA necessarily provided us with, but the records were out there and we just had to search for them.
Okay. I appreciate that because that helps build. So first step, you talked about your objectives, but the second was the weaknesses, and identification seems to be like one of the first weaknesses that we can get ANC commissioners to sort of help with, and we can plan around that. The second piece the third piece in the PowerPoint you have is the exemptions piece of it. And you noted that you think the solution should be to change the reform to require certification by applicant, and then also require a sort of a licensed real estate broker to submit a report of comparable properties in order to show sort of a good faith piece there. Is there any other? Oh, and I like this. Do not give further exemptions to owners, developers found cheating reportedly and advertising this. Is there anything you want to add to that, or sort of why you listed these as solutions?
Well, I think to make it clear, if you go in to look for an exemption, you want to apply for an exemption, only a few of the exemptions say you actually have to maintain your property at the same time you have the exemption. Now, I've been informed by the director that in fact they do require this but there should be a notice right out front that if you're going to get an exemption, you have to maintain it as well, and you have to certify that you will do so. You have to, of course, go look up the standards. They don't put them on their website there for you to read. So there's a lot of clarification here for exemption applicants that says you are going to be held accountable for your property even when you get the exemption. That message doesn't come through. And I might also add that with regard to their website, that for people who are going to complain about a vacant or blighted property, the website suggests that if property is eligible for an exemption, you don't need to report it, which of course keeps the list of properties down on their list. But what you really need is all these properties reported and then required to ask for an exemption. So there's some real weaknesses on their reporting, on their application forms and on their website.
The one thing I would add is that the exemptions that don't need to be continued without some checking by DCRA. They need to go out there and make sure that the exemption is still valid. And that's particularly true with construction permit exemptions, because the construction may not actually be happening. And that's exactly what's happened in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Another example is where somebody wants to advertise their property for rent or sale, and they can just put in a very high price for it and just sit there on the vacant property. So we need to be able to require them to come in with comparables from a licensed real estate broker so that you can check the opportunities for fraud there. There's a very strong financial incentive here not to report if you do report, to get an exemption. And we need to confront that with a strong enforcement program. People don't just self comply when it means maybe $20,000 or $30,000 a year for them.
Yeah. When you all were out, did any of the properties already have sort of the enforcement, I'm calling a yard sign because that's what it is, an enforcement yard sign already on it?
No.
No. Okay. I saw Trupti say no, and Dr. Erickson also say no. Okay. And then the other piece of this is the tax rate discrepancy issue, which is sort of a part of the enforcement piece of this. And I see you sort of had a suggestion about the tax classification don't match, but help DCRA having a system for checking these and asking the council to sort of do our part to ask OTR to sort of report as well. One suggestion came up is whether we should implement a sliding scale of taxation based upon time on the blighted list, sort of as a way to incentivize property owners to fix their properties. If the top rates were sort of truly onerous, it would help incentivize property owners to get their buildings removed from the list. What do you think this is a potential solution as well, sort of having this sort of sliding scale of taxation on the blighting list, or your thoughts based on your palette?
Well, my concern would be that the tax rate for blighted is already very, very high. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to rack up a big tax bill very quickly that way. And if the tax bill gets so big that the property then can't be sold, for instance, because it's got a tax lien against it, that may actually inhibit further development of the property. So I think if it gets too great, it's just not going to serve its effective purpose.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Okay, I have to hop over. It's my turn on DOEE. Thank you all so much for your testimony. I appreciate the PowerPoint presentation. You've set some great solutions here, so I think it's now up to us to get them done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you, each of you, for your testimony. You're going to be excused. You can still watch, but I'm going to invite the director in. Thank you again. And just a reminder, those of you who didn't submit written testimony, please do so.
Thank you, Chairman.
So you all are excused. I appreciate the work.
Thank you.
And we will now hear from the director, Ernest Trappa, Director of the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. Also being invited in are Frank Bessinier, who is Division Chief, Assessment Services Division at the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, and Brandon Wells, who is the Exemption Specialist and Appraiser at the Real Property Assessment Division, Office of the Chief Financial Officer. My understanding is that Director Trappa has a statement, which I've seen, but the two from the OCFO are here to answer questions. Director, when you're ready, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, council members and staff. I am Ernest Trappa, the Director of the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, DCRA. I'm here this afternoon to discuss how vacant and blighted properties are handled in the District of Columbia. As you know, DCRA performs vacant and blighted property inspections based on complaints from the public, including from advisory neighborhood commissioners or a member of the council. Once DCRA receives a complaint, whether on its website or from 311, an inspector is sent to the property to determine whether it meets the classification standards set forth in DC Code. Once a classification or reclassification has been made, the property owner has the right to appeal the classification. Assuming the property owner does not make an appeal or the appeal is denied, the classification is sent to the Office of the Tax and Revenue, OTR. OTR then begins taxing the property at a higher rate based on this classification. DCRA and OTR have worked together to implement new technology to improve the communication between the two agencies. In December 2020, it was discovered that during the technology transition, some information regarding classification of vacant and blighted properties were not being properly transmitted and or received. Since that time, both agencies have been in collaboration to ensure that our systems are properly communicating to address the issue. We have resolved many of these issues and discrepancies, and will continue to address any inaccuracies that come to light. Once a property has been classified as either vacant or blighted, the owner can apply for one of 5 exemptions pursuant to DC Official Code 423131.06. Assuming the property meets the criteria for a specific exemption, DCRA will grant the exemption. Once granted, DCRA shares this information with OTR, which then pauses taxing the property at a higher rate for vacant or blighted rate, then begins taxing the property at a lower class 1 rate. The lower tax rate remains in effect until the exemption has expired or has been revoked. DCRA aims to protect the public health, safety, and economic interest and the quality of life of residents, businesses, and visitors to the District of Columbia by ensuring code compliance and regulating businesses. The Vacant and Blighted Properties Program supports this objective by providing effective enforcement of the vacant and blighted properties laws that in turn encourages returning properties to the housing stock or for productive use, including affordable housing, which is one of the core to the program's existence. In fiscal year 21, the Vacant and Blighted Properties Program inspected more than 1,600 properties, successfully served 553 notices of infraction related to property enforcement issues, and conducted 1,500 abatements. Property owners who have been cited by DCRA are responsible for performing the necessary repairs and or abatement measures to bring their properties back into productive use. DCRA, however, uses its regulatory and oversight authority to assist property owners in returning their properties to productive use. We have worked with many property owners to bring their properties back to an occupied productive use. But I want to take this opportunity to highlight 3 of such properties. The first example is 133 Elmira Street Southwest. DCRA designated this property as blighted in 2019. The property had boarded windows and doors, unsafe balconies and porch, exposed metal and wood surfaces that were not protected against decay or rust, and multiple holes in the exterior walls. We notified the property owner that their status had changed to Class 4 blight in July 2019, and a timely appeal was filed. Within a couple of months, the property owner took proactive steps to abate the extensive list of issues by obtaining the necessary construction permits and inspections. The property now has been rehabilitated and is currently occupied. Another example is 2302 Nicholson Street Southeast, which was a property classified as Class 4 blight due to boarded windows and doors, holes in exterior walls, openings that were not watertight and secured properly, trash and debris throughout the property, and partial siding that was missing. DCRA notified the property owner of the violations, and in response, they obtained the necessary permits for performing the repairs to abate the violation. This property has been renovated, brought back to productive use, and is currently occupied. The final example is 3019 Cambridge Place Northwest. DCRA inspectors determined that this property was vacant after observing doors and windows that were not securely closed. We notified the property owner and learned that they would begin the necessary renovations to abate these issues. The property owner is an elderly individual and unable to live alone, which is why the property began to deteriorate and become vacant. Fully rehabilitating this property has taken some time due to the major delays in receiving the necessary construction materials, which also has caused a financial strain on the property owner. DCRA granted the property owner a hardship exemption while they continue to make the necessary repairs. Once construction is complete, the owner's son plans on moving into the home to assist in bringing the property back to productive use. These are just a few examples, and I recognize that there's room for improvement. To that end, DCRA has been an active participant in the Vacant to Vibrant Interagency Working Group. The working group began meeting in the summer of 2021 and consists of employees from the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure, the Department of Housing and Community Development, OTR, and DCRA. This working group's main objective is to create recommendations on how to bring vacant and blighted properties into productive use by developing methods to quickly turn them into affordable workforce or market rate housing. The working group has identified gaps in the law that have allowed properties to remain vacant for a long period of time, and thus assessing possible legislative amendments to address these concerns. In May 2021, this committee convened a public roundtable on this topic. Since that time, DCRA has worked with ANC Commissioners Elkins and Speck to conduct a pilot program in ANC 3G. The pilot program sought to ascertain how the vacant buildings program could be enhanced with collaboration between DCRA and ANCs in identifying properties that are vacant and or blighted. In fiscal year 21, 67 properties were classified as vacant and blighted in ANC 3G. 65 were vacant, 2 were blighted. These properties have been identified through a 7-year period. DCRA worked with ANC Commissioners Elkins and Speck to identify how many of these 67 properties were vacant or blighted, and to identify additional properties of which DCRA might not have been aware of. During the pilot, DCRA inspected the 67 properties and found that 43 properties were occupied, 20 were still vacant, 2 were blighted, and 2 addresses no longer existed. With this new information, all properties had their tax classifications appropriately corrected. We are in the process of notifying the owners of the 20 vacant properties to remind them of their responsibility to notify DCRA of any status changes to the property pursuant to DC Official Code 42-3131.06a. The pilot program provided DCRA with valuable opportunity to partner with ANC 3G in identifying vacant and blighted properties and updating our records where appropriate. From this program, we learned that many property owners will abate the violations and bring their properties back to productive use without additional enforcement action from DCRA. As previously indicated, of the 67 vacant blighted properties, 43 were occupied and thus were no longer vacant or blighted. This suggests that DCRA's current resources for addressing vacant and blighted properties in the district are effective. DCRA and ANC 3G have agreed to work together on addressing the problem of vacant and blighted properties in the community. In addition to the technological advancements previously discussed, DCRA has implemented enhancements to streamline the permitting process, which has been instrumental to the vacant buildings program. One such area that may get overlooked is permitting. When a vacant or blighted property owner has been cited and is attempting to abate the issue that caused a particular notice of infraction, they often need to obtain a permit before the abatement work can begin. DCRA has improved the permit application process with our permit wizard. This was an initiative the agency successfully implemented over the last year after we saw a real need to better assist homeowners and developers in navigating the permitting process. Permit Wizard guides the customer through a series of questions, and based on their responses, the system advises what permits are needed, the projected cost, and what plan review and inspections are needed by DCRA and other government agencies. This is just one example of how improvements within DCRA and other areas can assist the vacant and blighted buildings program in achieving its mission. Another area where DCRA saw a way to improve the vacant and blighted program and overall process is through updating our outdated data system with a modernized land use management platform. The agency has conducted market research and drafted a statement of work for a system that will support its ongoing efforts to further improve the vacant building program. This new platform will capture a baseline of property records and their vacancy status, and will assist in record keeping, the reconciliation process, and making searching for properties easier and faster. The platform will keep a historical log of changes to the property, such as change in ownership and vacancy status. The system will also enable better workflow processes that will meet the agency's needs and be able to create internal and external notifications for DCRA employees and property owners, reminding them of certain steps along the way as a property navigates the vacant buildings program. These are just some of the highlights of the new system, and all of these improvements will make the program more efficient and more effective in handling the program's tasks and accomplishing the overall mission. DCRA has collaborated with our sister agencies such as DC Fire and Emergency Medical Services and the Metropolitan Police Department to aid us in identifying vacant and blighted properties in the district. We have educated many of our sister agencies as to what conditions constitute a vacant and blighted property. With this information, agencies that are inspecting or dealing with an issue at a property for another reason may also identify conditions that make the property vacant and or blighted and relay this information to DCRA. For example, DCRA will provide a list of Class 3 and Class 4 properties to the firm's fire prevention unit. As they conduct fire prevention inspections, firms provide information on the current status of the building, and that is if the property currently has a Class 3 vacant designation. If the property has further deteriorated, firms will notify our office of the current status of the building, as well as any fire code violations for a follow-up inspection. DCRA will go out and change the occupancy status of the building if appropriate, as well as cite for any violations of the DC code over which we have jurisdiction. With regards to NPD, DCRA provides with the NPD Environmental Crimes Unit to secure properties. DCRA works with the NPD Environmental Crimes Unit to secure properties that have either been recently involved in some type of criminal activity or have been considered an incubator for potential criminal activity, prostitution, and or drug use. These requests come to DCRA during both normal and after working hours. When DCRA responds to these requests to secure the properties, we will also inspect and potentially reclassify the occupancy status of the property. This data sharing and open communication with our sister agencies allows DCRA to properly identify and abate properties that have deteriorated further or that previously were unknown to the agency. I hope my testimony is helpful to you and to the general public in understanding how DCRA identifies vacant and blighted properties, takes enforcement action against property owners who are in violation of the law, and can assist them in bringing properties back to productive use. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before the committee, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And if we could be on the 10-minute clock for questions, I may have a couple of rounds. So, Director Chapa, in your statement, you talked about the pilot with 2 ANC commissioners. It might have been specifically properties located in ANC 34G. And you characterize it, let me see, 67 of the 67 vacant and blighted properties, 43 were occupied. This suggests that DCRA's current resources for addressing vacant and blighted properties in the district are effective. I don't understand that. If 2/3 of your records were incorrect, why does that mean that your resources are effective?
I want to start by saying there's always room for improvement and we can always get better. In totality, if you look at the positive outcomes of the vacant building program by any measure, whether it is inspections done within the service level that we promise, which is gone down from 38 business days to 30 business days, we are hitting the mark there. If you look at inspections that are done within 90 days for—
We're talking about vacant properties.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but
Vacant properties,
if 2/3 of the properties you identified in 34G were incorrect and incorrectly classified, how does that mean that your program is effective? And please don't talk to me about how your metrics are getting better. I would just like to know how that, how the basis for saying that your resources for addressing vacant and blighted properties are effective. Or should I move on?
I think we can move on.
Okay. You also mentioned, I had not heard of this working group, Vacant to Vibrant Interagency Working Group. Is that still active?
The working group has not been, what is that word? Has not been abolished. So we continue working with our sister agencies to address the issues that we see in the Vacant and Blighted program.
You're saying the working group has been abolished?
No, has not. You asked if it was active.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not been active, but it's not been abolished. And you said that the working group has identified gaps in the law. The impression I have from your testimony is that this was last summer, that the working group has identified gaps in the law that have allowed properties to remain vacant and or blighted for long periods of time, and thus are assessing possible legislative amendments to address these concerns. So when do we see those?
Chairman, as you know, we have legislative cycles that we go through. So I don't have a definite date as to when the ideas we are considering will be completely approved to the protocols we have in place. But the work that has been done has highlighted steps that can be taken to address gaps in the law, which we know people can take advantage of.
Well, let me just be clear. We had a hearing last May. This working group started meeting in the summer of 2021. The working group has identified legislative amendments and we have nothing. The council has nothing. So I can't do anything with nothing. And this hearing, of course, was an opportunity to give us something. Let me see. I'm not quite sure where to go with this question. Let me try this. When Commissioner Speck was testifying, he testified about two properties owned by the same individual, Cornelius Donnelly. One is 5504 Nebraska Avenue and the other is 3216 Morrison. As I recall, they are almost back to back, separated by an alley. The 5504 Nebraska has been classified as Class 1 since 2018. Including for the first half of 2022. His testimony is that it's been vacant for years. And 3216 is classified as vacant this year, meaning 2022, but residential in all the preceding years. And Mr. Speck was quite clear that once again, I say that because apparently on an annual basis, Mr. Donnelly goes to DCRA and gets a construction permit and no work is done. I assume you were listening to Mr. Speck's testimony. This was brought to your attention at the hearing last May, and I actually wrote about it in my newsletter in last June. Why is DCRA allowing these two properties to continue to evade the vacant property tax?
I'm not exactly sure the basis for saying DCRA is allowing a property owner to evade property taxes. When it comes to specific properties, honestly, I don't memorize what is happening.
Okay, let me try again. 5504 Nebraska was brought to your attention at the hearing last May, and again in June when I wrote about it in my newsletter. it is classified as class 1 and therefore is not being classified as vacant. Commissioner Speck testified today that there continues to be inactivity at that house. DCRA evidently has either ignored the property, which is a form of allowing it to avoid the vacant property tax, or DCRA has granted it an exemption. Commissioner Speck testified that he believes that there's been a construction exemption. He was very clear in his testimony last May. He was very clear in his testimony today that there's been no construction work done. If DCRA is giving an exemption because of construction and no construction is being done, then DCRA is allowing the property owner to avoid the vacant property tax. So my question is, why is DCRA allowing the property owner to avoid the vacant property tax?
I'll have to check the claim that there's been no construction before I can respond to that. At this roundtable, I don't have information on the nature of construction that has occurred or that allegedly hasn't occurred. So it would be premature for me to conclude that DCRA is allowing somebody to game the system when I don't have all the facts of hand. A year is a long period of time for things to happen. And it will be appropriate for me to take another look at this and see if, yes, there was no evidence of construction. And then if that is the case, we can revoke the exemption. But if there is some evidence of construction, then there is a legitimate basis for granting the exemption.
Now, you wrote to me last year that the DCRA inspectors inspect a property within 90 days of granting a construction inspection.
That's correct. That's our
Okay.
service level that we have.
Commissioner Speck testified today that there's been no work. I would assume that if Mr. Donnelly hurries over to the site this afternoon and gets a shovel and starts to turn some earth and then leaves the property, that would not be sufficient for your inspector to say, there's active construction. This is how I described the property last June in my newsletter. Actually, I was quoting the ANC. The front yard is overgrown. The front door is an accumulation of mail, and the backyard and deck are covered with trash and weeds. That was a quote unquote. Since then, DCRA has inspected the property, affixed a neon green vacant property notice on the front door, and the yard has been cleaned up. Well, sort of. If you peek through a front window, you will see an unbelievable accumulation of rubbish filling the living and dining rooms. It is so obvious that the house is vacant, arguably blighted, and yet for at least 4 years, DCRA has failed to list the property as either vacant or blighted. This appears to be another instance of tax fraud with DCRA and a better. The owner has repeatedly applied for construction permits. Active construction is grounds for an exemption from the vacant property tax. But I ask you, how many years does it take to repair an existing front porch? Permit B1705180 was issued in May 1st, 2017, and again in 2018 and in 2019. And in fact, earlier this month, that means 2021, he applied again. This is 5504 Nebraska Avenue, which, as I said, before this hearing, I checked the real property tax base, and it is classified as class 1 and has been every year as far back as the website goes, which is through 2018. What does it take to get a vacant property classified as vacant? Mr. Director?
Mr. Chairman, the standards that have been set for vacant building, meaning open and accessible, there's no intent to reoccupy, all those details go towards getting the building classified as vacant. For 5504 Nebraska, I don't think the issue is whether it's vacant or not. From what you mentioned, you wrote about your newsletter to what the commissioner talked about, the question is whether there's been bona fide construction activity. And that is something that I'll have to look into. I cannot give you an answer at this roundtable on this particular case.
I should note that the properties I have on a list to talk to you about are all properties that have been communicated to DCRA at our last hearing. Council Member Bonds, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Director, for appearing today. One, I'd like to, can you tell me how many vacant units you have classified in your most current report?
Currently, we have 3,390 vacant buildings in our data system and published on our website.
Okay, and how many are classified as blighted?
Blighted, we out of that 3,390, let's see, I believe 177
Okay,
classified as blighted.
all right. All right, thank you for that. You mentioned, and I don't have a copy of your testimony, so I just have to go by the quick notes that I took. In your testimony, you were speaking about the process that your office uses to make your classifications. You mentioned that your goal is to return the properties to housing stock. And I made a note of 1,500 abatements. That's the number of reviews or inspections your agency makes or has made in the last year.
1,500 is correct, as the abatements we've done last year. They represent when we go in and we've addressed an issue at the property when the property owner fails to do so. So it could range from taking care of excessive vegetation or trash, or boarding it up, or taking other steps to protect the health and safety of the public.
Okay, so you also said that the owner has to make the repairs and that your agency works with the owner to return the property to, I guess, usable condition. And I guess for me, I'm trying to figure out, does that mean that your agency assists the owner in, let's say, making sure that they get construction permits quickly so that they can return the property to use?
That's correct. Those are some of the steps we take by helping property owners navigate the permitting process and move through it expeditiously. We also give them guidance on how to, for example, what they need to address to take a property from blighted to vacant status and ultimately rehabilitate it. We also.
So in getting permits faster, are they required to pay an extra fee? You know, we said we were doing that. Or is this humanitarian effort that your agency is undertaking by trying to return the properties to use?
We have different service levels that the customer or property owner can choose from. We provide options. So if the property owner wants to go through a standard process, the service level is 30 days. If they want to take advantage of our expedited programs, yes, that can be done sooner at the premium. So we provide options and educate our customers about what the options are.
Okay, so in other words, you just really remind the owner that if they get a construction permit to move forward, that they can do that, but it's not that it's really expedited.
I wouldn't say that because I have to look at unique cases. The expediting option is available, and we educate people about that. And we also tell them the standard review is available. That's sort of like how we support our property owners in going through the permitting process.
And thank you for that. That is exactly what I heard, that you make attempts to support property owners to return their property to use. But I'm thinking a little bit about the chairman's question about the fragrancy of the use of a construction permit and how it really becomes a deterrent. In other words, keeping the property on a list that says that it is occupiable when nothing really happens through the use of the permit. So I'm a little concerned about that. Does that bother you?
And I may ask you to clarify a little bit as far as what you are asking bothers me, and that is properties going through the construction process? Or
Properties that an owner can get a construction permit and they actually do not do construction. But on the books, on your books, they have a construction permit now. So that sort of stops the process of classifying it as blighted, as an example.
I understand. Certainly, anybody who gets a construction permit to rehabilitate a property and doesn't follow through on that is a concern that we have, which is one of the reasons why we try to inspect properties that have obtained a construction exemption within 90 days.
Okay, you say try to, but in other words, if I have been cited for a vacant or blighted property, I engage with your inspectors, you assist me in getting a permit for construction. I get the permit for construction, you're saying, and then you will try to inspect it within 90 days, but there's no guarantee that there will be a subsequent inspection, correct?
That's incorrect.
Oh, okay. Well, correct me, please.
That's because we have a performance indicator and a service level as it relates to construction exemptions, and that is to inspect 90%, I hope this is the correct answer, 90% within 90 days, not 100% within 90 days. Going from 90% within 90 days to 100% within 90 days takes some level of effort and resources. And if that's the direction that the council wants us to go, we can certainly talk about what it's going to take to inspect all construction exemptions within 90 days, 100% of the time, or any time period that the council desires.
I see. So the 1,500 abatements are a variety. Some are construction permits. Some are just continuous complaints that you might receive. Is that what you're sharing with us?
The abatements are not inspections.
Okay.
The abatements are for scenarios where there is, for example, excessive trash and vegetation. People complain. We cite the owner. We ask the owner to correct it. The owner fails to do so. We go and cut the grass or secure the windows, and then through the special assessment process, put a lien on the property. So that's
okay.
not abatement.
So how many inspections for construction permits do you do annually?
I don't have that number handy, but that's something that I can get to you.
Yes, it just seems to me that if you are doing 90% and re-inspections based on the issuance of a construction permit, that, you know, we would want to know what that number is, because we're trying to figure out how the system works to improve the quality of life in the neighborhoods, as well as to collect more resources so we can put that money into more opportunities for improving the neighborhood. So that would be very, very helpful. I'm about out of my time, and so I will close here. Thank you very much, Mr. Director.
Thank you, and I'll certainly make sure that we get you the number of construction exemption inspections that we do
Please.
annually.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chairman?
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. But Director Trumpa, we went through this last year, particularly with regard to 2910 18th Street. I mean, I don't know why it is that the vacant properties that come to me seem to be the only vacant properties where your inspectors don't get out within 90 days, because so many of the properties that have come to my attention are the ones where the construction, the inspectors aren't out there. So you say 90%, but over and over, I don't see it. Councilmember Lewis George for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And good evening, Director Chopra. I want to ask, I was going to ask about specific properties, but it seems that that isn't a good avenue because you'll want to get back to us on that. And so we'll have to go through that list. So I just want to ask you a few things. Have you done any work with Director Harley Harper from Building Blocks or Director McFadden from the Neighborhood Safety Engagement or Deputy Mayor Geldart? Have you done any work with them in DCRA regarding properties that may be, you all have previously abated or are vacant and blighted? And if so, can you describe what that work has been?
We are involved through the delivery of our services to support the Building Blocks program. So when they identify properties, there's a process in place where DCRA services are engaged, be it to inspect or abate or ratchet up enforcement actions. Those are some of the ways I can describe how we support the Building Blocks program and the overall reduction in gun violence and crime in the city. Okay, that's great to hear. I'm asking because I sort of identified properties that are vacant or blighted or have been serviced by the abatement team that are still hubs for drug usage. There have been instances where paraphernalia, guns, drugs have been found in vacant, blighted properties. So you have an important role in public safety in the city as a result of the fact that those properties are being used in ways that impact our public safety. And so there's a number of properties on Kennedy, on a number, I don't want to just single out Kennedy Street, that I know have been sort of, I guess, flagged by the public safety directors. And so one of them is the 614, 616, and 618 Kennedy Street. They're a group of houses on Kennedy Street unit. The abatement team has had sort of a yard sign out there for about, I don't know, it's been maybe a year and a half there. Can you confirm then that those property, that there are liens on those properties on Kennedy Street? Yeah, today?
Yeah.
Oh, that's impossible. There are 3,390 properties across the city. I can't confirm the status of anything, but I think that's something that we can look into and get back to you on that as far as whether there are any liens or anything of that nature. Okay. So and I heard Councilmember Bond sort of asked you about the abatement process. So describe that you sort of started describing it to me, to Councilmember Bonds. It looks like you go out, you do, inspection of the area. Sometimes you put up boards or gates, et cetera. And then it looks like the next step is putting a lien on the property. Am I describing that right? Or what else is happening? What else are you all doing within the abatement team? All right, this would help. When there's first, the vacant building program is based off complaint. That's what the law has set up for us to do. So we don't go out scouring the city for vacant properties. When a complaint is sent to us, we have 30 business days to inspect and make a determination. if the property is deemed vacant, the owner of record receives a notification. And assuming they don't appeal that classification, we transmit it over to the Office of Tax Revenue for them to tax it. When it comes to a vacant property that has violations, be it trash, graffiti, open and accessible windows and entrances, we still are required by law to notify the property owner of the violations for them to abate it and address it. If they fail to address it in a timely fashion, then we issue a notice of infraction, a fine, and that goes through the due process involving Oversight administrative hearings, and that takes its own path. When there is immediate health and danger risk, or a life, more appropriately, if there's a life safety issue, then we look at our resources to see if, one, we can abate it, or if there are other ways to address the issue. And when we have to abate it, we address the issue and then pass on the cost to the property owner through special assessments. If they fail to pay the special assessments, then it becomes a lien on the property.
Okay. So at what point is the yard sign put down? Because I have a bunch of I just have a bunch of properties that have yard signs and been there for like 2 years. So what point does the yard sign get put down?
When we abate a property.
So when you I guess you said you spend money, I guess, boarding it up or putting gates, is that what you consider? Describe what you are considering abating.
The boarding up is one example of abatement. So, like, let's say there's a fire and friends contacts us to go secure the property. That's a kind of abatement.
So it's the boards, gates, the mowing the lawn, the picking up trash. That's what you consider abating a property.
Yes, those are examples of abatement.
Okay, and then once you all do that, we end up in the process where that's when the lien comes on the properties.
The special assessment, if the owner fails to pay the special assessment, which is the way we pass on the abatement cost to the property owner, it becomes a lien.
Okay. How long can a property be lien? How long can a property be in lien status? Just forever?
Oh, I don't think there's a definite date, but what I do know is that properties can have liens on them for 5, 10 years, depending on certain conditions. When a property has a lien, I think it's important that I clarify this in the next step to broaden the understanding of the process. If a property has lien and a lot of special assessments, they can also go through the tax sale process.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, that's managed by OCFO. And somebody can scoop up the property and pay the liens. Or sometimes nobody buys it through the tax sale process. And we have seen that quite a bit, actually. That's
weird in a city where everybody's trying to find housing. But I hear you. So I guess I'm getting to the point where we have a number of properties that I guess haven't been abated based on the fact that they have the yard signs and you have all put up boards around the houses, but they're still being utilized as hubs for crime. So what is the next step there? Is there any next step, or I just have to deal with the boards and the gates and that's it? Public safety, just that's all we got. That's all DCRA can do. Is that's it? That's where it stops. That's where the line stops.
I wouldn't say that's where the line stops, but in terms of the current tools we have, that is our limitation. We will continue to support broader city efforts to incentivize returning properties to productive use. If it means outreach to the owner, trying to understand what else the city can do to help them. if it means referring them to
Yeah.
the Department of Housing and Community Development for potential grants. Those are some of the soft tools, I would say, that are not really a DCRA tool, but part of how we support and partner with our sister agencies to help address a particular situation.
Okay, I noticed you said earlier, and
Hello?
Councilmember, you have frozen. All right, well, she was near the end of her round. There'll be another round, maybe. Mr. Director, how many inspectors do you have dedicated to the vacant property program?
In total, we have a pool of 40, 4 full-time employees, 36 resident inspectors.
I lost you. So there are 4 full-time on vacant property?
That's correct. And 36 resident inspectors.
And the 4 are inspecting, or is one of them a manager who's not inspecting?
One is a supervisor. He can do inspections, but his primary role is guiding the team.
So you have 3 in the field. Full
Say it
time.
again?
You have 3 in the field full time.
That's correct.
What follow-up does DCRA do when you ask OTR to reclassify a property?
When we ask OTR to classify a property, we send them a batch file and we review the result of that transmission. And if there are errors, we retransmit it. So it's a cycle of transmit, review errors, retransmit.
How often do you send a batch file?
I believe it's daily.
Okay. And how do you look for errors? What does that mean?
There can be a number of errors, a few examples. So what I mean by review for errors is, let's say the property is currently classified as vacant, and based off a follow-up inspection, we see that the conditions have deteriorated for it to meet the blight threshold. So when we classify it as blight and the appeal process is exhausted and our decision remains a blight, we send a file to OCFO indicating the property address, the square and lot and suffix. There are some additional fields. If the SSL square lot number doesn't match, we get an error report. And that is what we try to reconcile and retransmit. So that's an example of the process and how it works today.
So it would be let's say the square is 100 and the lot is 10. And you send over in the batch file square 100 lot 10, and but actually you put in lot 11, which doesn't exist. Then OTR kicks it back. It gives you an error report that says there's no such lot.
That's correct.
Okay. And let's say that there is a lot 11 in my example, but that's not the property you meant. OTR wouldn't send that back as an error report.
Let me make sure I understood you. So in the scenario, we've sent a classification when we shouldn't have for the particular
No.
property?
I'm trying to understand what the error report is, and it sounds like what the error report is non-existent square or lot.
That was just one example.
What other kind of errors?
Let's say it is currently classified as class 3. And I'm making this example of just property address 1800 Pennsylvania Avenue. And we submit the same class 3 classification to OTR. There will be a transmission error for us to sort of like reconcile because it already exists and there's no need for a change.
So these are computer generated errors, and it's where the computer is saying, sorry, but there's something not right with what you transmitted.
That's correct. The error messages and the transmission is automated.
So it's not one where, and so when you send that, and maybe this is where the OTR folks can step in, when you send that, that automatically goes into the tax records?
It goes into their system. They will have to speak to when.
Mr. Wells or Mr. Bessonnier?
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and council members. And
You're very quiet.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
Very, very faintly.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know if it's any better. I'm going to try to hold my mic here. No, still not. Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay. Brandon, will I fix the technical issues? Would you be so kind to respond to the error messages and how it's being generated? And I'm going to try to fix my side on the technical.
It might be that your plugs don't work. I've seen that before. If you disconnect that, we maybe can hear you.
All right, let's try this. Is it any better?
Marginally.
Marginal, okay. So Brandon, may I ask you, since my audio is not the best quality, to respond to the error messages and the type of errors that we experience or what the system generates, please?
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Afternoon.
Could you repeat your question, please?
Well, actually, my question wasn't about the errors. It was when the batch is sent over, if there isn't an error, is it automatically then changed in your system, the tax system?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So my example of square 100 lot 10. So DCRA, it has the right address, the right lot, the right square. They change it from 3 to 4, class 3 to class 4. Automatically that happens in DCR, in OTR's records.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Now, a property owner, you don't then notify the property owner. They just get a tax bill. Am I correct?
I believe that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And how soon do they get the tax bill? On the semi-annual cycle, or is it sooner?
I will have to check on that for you, Mr. Chairman. I know that when there's a change in the liability, a statement of account is generated in our system. I will have to check for you to see if those statements are generated when there is a class 3 or class 4 change.
Okay, that would be helpful. Mr. Director Chapa, you don't know, do you?
OTR will have to speak to that. What I have is just anecdotal information,
Okay.
and that is we transmit it today. It is effected in their system. A statement will go out at some point, whether it's 3 to 5 days or when the property bill is generated. They will know best.
Now, what I heard from you, Director Chapa, is that when your inspector determines that a property is vacant, you don't send that to OTR, you notify the property owner. And you still don't send it to OTR, you wait 30 days for the property owner to respond. And if the property owner disputes the classification, then you still don't send it to OTR, you wait for the property owner to dispute your classification. Is that correct?
That's correct. The code requires us to notify the property owner, and if they fail to take action within the stipulated time frame, which I believe is 30 days, then we can move forward.
I'm not sure the code requires that, and that's something I will have to look at. But what this means then is that it could be months between the inspection and OTR actually changing the classification.
That's correct.
And how long do these appeals with you over classification last? What's the longest it can last?
The appeals?
Yeah, to you, with regard to classification.
If they don't appeal within 30 days, it's over.
And if they do appeal, how long can that last?
I would have to double check, but we do have a service level to make decisions on appeals within 30 days.
I didn't follow that.
If we notify you and you appeal, we have 30 days to make a decision. So what that means is that it wouldn't take months for an appeal to be hanging out there. We have a set time frame to make a decision.
So your testimony is that it's always within 60 days. That is 30 days for the owner to appeal, they appeal, and then another 30 days. It's never longer than that second 30 days.
Never is a strong word.
I know, that's what I'm getting at.
We have goals that we meet, Chairman, and we have performance standards when it relates to making decisions. And I know we are meeting a performance standard. There's no such thing, and I'll use the construction exemption as an example. Our goal is to do construction exemption inspections within 90 days, 90% of the time. As it relates to appeal, I believe we are meeting the 30 days cycle the vast majority of the time. The specifics of how many appeals we've received and how many we rendered a decision within 30 days, those the level of detail around that is something I can circle back with you on.
Okay, well, as you know, I'm deeply skeptical that you actually get the inspectors out 90% of the time within 90 days. And so I would like you to get back to me on the how long it has taken. What's the longest it's taken to handle an appeal?
The longest ever, or in the context of a particular year and what our service level is? I want to be sure that we are responsive to your question.
Within the last 12 months, the longest it's taken.
We'll get you information about our service level.
Because I'm not interested in, even if it's 90%, I want to know some of these properties, how long they can avoid the higher classification by going through an appeal process with you. So I want to know the longest. And I only need it for the last 12 months. When we come back, because I'm now over my time again, I do want to ask, I think the two gentlemen from Office of Tax and Revenue about 1000 C Street and about 3228 Hyatt Place and 2920 Ontario Road. Because those both appear to now be taxed. No, Hyatt and Ontario are taxed as blighted. C Street is taxed as vacant. C Street in particular has been very successful for 20 years avoiding the vacant property tax. Hasn't been occupied in probably 30 years. 10th and C Northeast. So I'll ask the gentleman from OTR about those properties when we my next round, Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks again to the witnesses. Mr. Shopler, let's say that I have a construction permit and it's now 82 days. There is an inspection. Let's say that I ask for more time. More time is granted. And this occurs maybe three different cycles. Is each visit to a site where there is a construction permit in the realm of 90 days, or is it after the second time, third time that maybe there's some slacking? What I'm trying to understand is how we have properties that have had a life of 10 years, 5 years on the books that we know are vacant, but somehow they're not taxed at the vacant level. So I'm just trying to, create a scenario in my head, and maybe you work with me and tell me whether or not this is possible or likely.
Let me start by saying, is it likely a property can remain vacant for 10, 20 years? Yes. Is it likely a property can claim exemptions for 20 years? Unlikely, because there are limits on the type of exemptions and the number of years you can claim an exemption. I believe the maximum is 5, even if the property changes hands. What is likely, and that is just a private owner making that decision, is I'm going to pay the vacant property taxes, no questions asked. Some just do exactly that. And I think that is what the law allows. So while some people may be upset about that, that's property rights and you have to respect it. When it comes to the construction exemption, if an owner asks for more time, you don't get more time to meet the threshold, because we grant you the exemption and we do follow-up inspection to see if there's construction activity to justify the exemption through inspection reports on the construction side that's substantiated, and through sometimes you can see if somebody has put up a wall or somebody has taken steps to honor the intent of the construction exemption. And if they are not meeting it, we revoke it. And once we revoke it, we transmit the information over to our partners at our Office of Tax and Revenue.
Okay, I hear you, and I see some of the complications in my question here, but what concerns me the most is properties that I know of. Properties that I know are vacant, have been vacant longer than 5 years, and are gradually deteriorating, where I see the wear and tear on the windows. And I see that soon you can just, with your fists, knock that window out and you can go in and occupy it, which was the situation before it was cared for in the front so that it looks like a livable environment. I know that it's classified as vacant, but it's very close to becoming blighted. So my question is, how do you say that there's 5 years of vacancy. After 5 years, do you go back and see if it's becoming blighted?
No.
Okay.
5 years that you can get an exemption. There's no limit on how long a property can stay vacant. There is a limit on how many years of exemptions you can have. And that is 5. So if I have a property and I want to give it to my great grandchild who's not been born yet, and I'm willing to pay the vacant taxes, it can stay vacant as long as I want. If I'm claiming some type of exemption, construction, probate, whatever the case may be, the 5 limit comes in. So I want to make it clear that there's no limit on how long a property can stay vacant. There is a limit on the exemption. However, if the condition of the property deteriorates, then we take action to change the classification from vacant to blighted, which triggers the blight rate of 10 per $100. So it's onerous.
Yes.
But that's the reality. And I think you are getting at something that is perhaps an improvement opportunity that we have to look at it in terms of how do we get to that level. And that is constant monitoring of our properties to see if the condition is deteriorating. Now, what is the ideal level of monitoring? Is it weekly, monthly, every 6 months, every year? Those are conversations that I think have legs, and it's worthwhile to explore, perhaps increasing the frequency of inspections of vacant properties to see those that meet the blight threshold, and also using that same opportunity to identify properties that are now vacant that the owner has not registered as required by law. And to the extent that it's helpful, I want to share with you some of the things we've done around the enforcement of vacant properties where the owner has not registered. The law requires the owner to register. The law does not require DCRA to go knock on doors to see if something is vacant or not, because there are a whole lot of issues associated with that.
I'm aware of that law, and I really think that law doesn't work for our city and our communities, but I know exactly what you're speaking of.
Thank you. And coming to the enforcement part, just looking at last year, fiscal year 21 compared to fiscal year 20, we increased our enforcement by 169%, catching owners who are failed to register and owners who have properties that have deteriorated and violated the vacant property standards. This information is on our website dashboard, where you can see that in fiscal year 20, we issued around 205 notice of infractions successfully served. But in fiscal year 21, we successfully served 553 notices of infraction. So there is an improvement in terms of the enforcement. We also realize there's a whole lot more we can do. So this conversation we're having today, I hope helps frame the conversation from everything is bad about the Vacant and Blighted building program. There are some things that work, but as a city, we need more.
Well, thank you, Mr. Director. And I would like to add to your conversation or thoughts about this. Perhaps you need to have a scale of determining the vacancy. And so when you reach level 5, then you know that the next step is going into blighted. And so therefore, that property is re-inspected sooner as opposed to the one that is in category 1 vacancy. So I appreciate that. I have a lot of questions about these properties because I think our goal has to be to clean up the neighborhood and to bring these properties into usefulness again. But I wanted to ask of the representatives from OTA a little bit about how what do you feel is the intent of this vacant blighted property information that comes to you? I know to collect money, but is there some other concern that you may have? Or is it that you just wait for the DCRA to inform you and you just do the tabulations and that's it? I mean, do we have some goals in mind? Mr. Wells, Mr. Vincari, Vincini. I'm
Yes,
sorry
my
if
name
I
is Frank.
mispronounced your name.
No, that's all right. Can you hear me? My audio quality is okay now? Yes.
What I'm trying, I can barely hear you still, but that's okay. What I am asking is there some other goal in mind other than just collecting the taxes as you receive the information from DCRA? In other words, is there some listing that you keep as we are thinking about improving the quality of a neighborhood? Because you know that blighted properties bring down the total value of a community. And one of the things you want to do is to keep the assessments high so you can keep the tax bills high. So I'm trying to understand the real relationship that we have between DCRA and our tax office and how it really benefits the city in general.
Certainly. Thank you for the question. So one of our main objective and mission in OTR to ensure that we collect the right amount of taxes that is due from the property owner. So keeping that in mind, it is vital for us to have accurate classifications so we can bill and collect accurately. Now, from our assessment division, who normally oversees the value, I know for a fact that they do take into consideration property conditions. Result, they are also in trying to facilitate the effort to have the accurate assessment value set and encourage the property owners to ensure that in fact the neighborhoods are safe and taxed properly through taxation. So that's, I think we share the same vision and the same goal when it comes to property conditions and collecting the right amount of taxes and safety overall across the district.
So in other words, the condition of a vacant or blighted property in a community can really hold down the value of the properties that are in that neighborhood. Because that value is included in the assessment that is the condition for assessing all of the properties in that neighborhood.
Yeah, so our current assessment operates under the fact of we look at current sales and comps and the property condition, right? So property condition certainly plays into the value of the property. And Brendan, if I may ask if, since you are representing the assessment division directly, if I have missed something, if you could elaborate.
I don't believe you missed anything. I think what you stated is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councilmember Lewis-George.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, sorry, I paused when I was talking. It was probably because I had two hearings running at the same time. I want to talk a little bit about what your quality control process is. Could you explain what DCRA's quality control process for vacant and blighted properties inspections? What are you doing to make sure that DCRA inspectors are adhering to procedure when deeming a property vacant or blighted?
Sure, I'll speak to that, and then I would have the program manager of the vacant property program also elaborate. Generally, as part of our quality assurance program, we train inspectors. So before they go out, they are trained on standards and trained on how to apply those standards. We also do weekly reviews of our inspection results to see if it provides opportunity to do something better. We also follow up on complaints that we receive to ascertain if we missed something or how to get better. We also have performance evaluations on our individuals and programs and service levels that we check to ensure that overall, the QA, and I would also add the QC, is in line with what we expect. And if there are any changes in our environment, how we address that.
Is there an office or part of DCRA that monitors sort of internal compliance with policy?
Which policy, if I may ask?
Policies regarding when you have and for vacant and blighted properties, but you could do it for any section. What's the process? So you said you respond to complaints or maybe allegations. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what's the process for responding to complaints or allegations that DCRA inspectors aren't applying inspection standards fairly? And as a result, and whatever is in that process, is there sort of an integrity and compliance unit within DCRA that oversees that process?
Starting from the earlier part of the question, as far as how we respond, yes, when the complaint comes in, it goes into a database where we have to respond within 3 days. That is a service level that we've committed publicly, and we publish results against that performance measure. When an issue comes up that we find out that, yes, it is justified, the manager gets involved and it becomes an opportunity to counsel or train and ensure that it doesn't happen again. So that's to the first part of your question. But overall, there are two components within the agency overall that helps with quality assurance and quality control. We have an agency performance unit that looks across the various divisions of DCRA. Vacant and Blighted program is no exception, to see if they are meeting the service standards. We also have an internal audit team that conducts audits based off the risk level and the risk appetite. And those are just a few examples of how compliance is baked into operations.
Okay. And so along the lines of quality assurance and quality control, I'm also speaking sort of also of integrity within that piece too. If there are allegations against an inspector, what steps do you all take? It's not just the quality piece here, but also the integrity piece here.
I'm not aware of any allegations against an inspector, but if such a thing surfaces, we would investigate and go through the HR process to ensure that, yes, everybody is being treated fairly, the facts are gathered, and appropriate action is taken.
Okay. I wanted to also ask, it seems as if our whole process is sort of reactive and not proactive, right? And so by that, I mean, your identification program it's complaint driven. Everything is complaint driven. Do you have a plan to sort of, you heard, I think Commissioner Speck talk about this, but do you all have a plan to do a top to bottom review of your current sort of list? And do you have a plan to start being proactive instead of waiting for a complaint to come in, having DCRA workers going around communities and neighborhoods, especially those that are most impacted? Do you have a plan to sort of have more of a, I guess, preventative program and proactive program versus just a complaint-driven program?
Yes, the complaint-driven program is a creation of council. That's how the program works. It is not a proactive program, and DC is not an exception. If you go to cities like Montgomery County, San Francisco, Boston, Baltimore City, I mean, that's just the way most cities are set up when it comes to vacant buildings. It's complaint-driven.
Okay.
As far as steps that we've taken, yes, the pilot was just one example where we are proactively looking for ways to enhance the data integrity, data management. There are also additional steps that we've taken
So, I mean, then the council's really not stopping you. If you did that pilot with those ANCs, you can technically do that pilot across the city. The council is not stopping you from having pilots across the city to have a full review of the current listings of vacant and blighted properties.
I'm not suggesting council is stopping us from doing a review. I wanted to state the fact that the program is designed a certain way based off our laws. As far as the pilot, we have planned on doing a pilot. So when the ANC brought up the pilot, it made sense for us to partner to explore ways we can work together and to ascertain the level of resources that is needed to reach a certain level of performance. That's an objective of the pilot. Another objective of the pilot
are you guys actively doing pilots in other communities right now? Are there other pilots happening right now in other communities? Because based on the pilot you did with ANC3G, they were able to see some sort of patterns. There were properties that were considered vacant and blighted that were occupied. You know, it seems that the list was just not updated. So I'm asking now, after that one pilot, are you doing pilots across the city?
There are different pilots that we are exploring, but not the same type of pilot that we did with Commissioner Speck and Commissioner Elkins. And this may help so that you understand some of the pilots that we've done. We did a pilot where it was around beautifying a community. So if you go down to Anacostia, you go down Good Hope Road and right down the bridge, you will see that we've created like a mural where we partner with the community and the business improvement district to beautify that area and return that vacant lot to a productive use or something pleasant for the community. We are also exploring different ways we can transmit data in a way that helps the community so that they can be part of crowdsourcing quality assurance. So for example, last year, we added a feature to our Scout data system where you log in, you put in an address, you'll be able to see the status of a particular property, how many years it's been deemed vacant or blighted, the last time it was inspected, and if an inspection has been scheduled, you'll be able to see that. That's just one example of proactive mechanism. We've also enhanced.
Can I ask you to commit to doing pilots across the city and in different sections of the city? Can you do a similar pilot that you did in ANC 3-4G? Could you do that perhaps in Ward 7, Ward 8, Ward 5, and other wards? I'm sure the chairman, has an extensive list. He can probably point you in the direction of locations that need sort of urgent pilots. Would you be willing?
We are not going to do the same thing. Based off what we've learned, we can do something that the community is vested in, and we are also vested in, and we have the resource to execute it successfully. What we've seen through the pilot that we did with ANC3 is that 60% of properties have been returned to productive use, regardless of the data quality issues. That's just the fact of the matter. And overall, the vast majority of vacant buildings are returned to productive use. If you go back to 2013, we had 12,000 plus vacant properties in our inventory. Now we have 3,390. That is a drastic reduction. So as people talk about pilots, we are very open to exploring ways we can work together within.
I think they were trying to help. I will say, I think the commissioners were all trying to sort of be of service to DCRA and say we could go around our specific SMDs and go through your list and let you know if it's still actually vacant or blighted. And that would sort of improve your database and also improve sort of the efficiency that your staff has to do. So I hear you. I thought it might be an idea that would actually sort of support you and your staff and make things easier. And an updated system means that you're directing your resources, in a productive way. But it's fine if that's not something that you all sort of, I guess, want to, do further. Another thing that came up is that DCRA reports gets they were saying that the 311 form and the DCRA form is different, and the DCRA form is probably the preferred form. What is there a way for you all to sort of update the 311 system, I guess, to go straight to DCRA, since that's the preferred form? And it seems to be that there's some issues with the 311 forms actually getting the attention that your actual DCRA, like actual report gets. Is there a way for you to sort of combine or change the 311 form to go straight directly to the DCRA process?
We've been working with our partners at our OUC that oversees the 311 program to find ways to, all get better. So what we've learned from the process where people report vacant buildings directly to us is something that we'll continue having the dialogue with our partners. So while I cannot speak for them, what I can comfortably speak to is that we'll continue working with them to make the necessary enhancements. Last year, we also did an experiment, and that is informing how we plan on moving forward. And that is when somebody reports a vacant property, they can get notification of the scheduled inspection date.
Right.
They get notification when the inspector is en route, like a dispatch system.
Mm-hmm.
And when the inspection is complete, they get a notification about that. And the results of the inspection, they get notification of that, so they can go into our data systems and look at what we actually found. It's
okay.
Going to be something valuable. So I get your point about working with 311, and we'll have those conversations to see what is an appropriate timeline to ensure that what we've learned from our form can be replicated on a bigger basis.
Okay. All right, my time is out. I will send over a list of, I think we all I received lists from community members wanting updates on certain vacant and blighted properties. So I will send that to, I will send that to your team directly, and hope to get a response on those. I will say, just leaving you with, I do think you all play a huge role in sort of the public safety issues in our city. And so I know you've been working with Director Harley Harper or Director McFadden. And so there are some properties that I also would like to send you that are of public safety concerns that are already been, abated. But we can't stop there, because if that's it, and we're not really seeking solutions to our public safety issues. So I look forward to connecting with you more on those properties as well. I'll specify them and at the director as well.
Thank you. And since this platform is open, I also want to use this opportunity to send a message to anybody who is listening. Certainly we'll respond to your list that is given. But anybody who wants to find out the status of a property doesn't need to send an email. You can go to our website, dcra.dc.gov, and go to our dashboard or log into our Scout system. It will show you the status of the property. Where I think the community can help us is they will say, no, I was by this property yesterday. You last inspected it 6 months ago. I can tell you that now the railing is falling off, which will trigger us to respond accordingly. So there is a team approach that is necessary here, but we really want to impress upon the public that emailing an employee is not the appropriate way to get a status of the property, because things slip through the cracks over email. We have systems in place that we've set up to efficiently respond to those things in a self-service manner. But if those systems are not functioning the way it is, then we'll double down on our efforts to improve upon the functionality.
Thank you. Councilman, you're over your time.
Okay, I won't add to that. Thank you.
When you send that list, would you copy the committee, please?
Absolutely.
Director, what's the status of the Foreign Missions Vacant Property Task Force? How often do they meet?
I'll have to check the frequency in terms of the details of the meeting, but I just don't recall it offhand. I know there's been several meetings over the last year.
If you could tell me how often, maybe give me the dates. Also, can you tell me, do you have at your fingertips the status of 5732 5th Street Northeast?
No, sir.
All right, would you get back to me on that? That was brought up actually, I believe, by Councilmember Lewis George at last year's hearing. I went out, looked at the property, the rear of the house is missing, and yet it's still classified as vacant as opposed to blighted. If you would please get back to me why it hasn't been reclassified. It has been listed as vacant since 2019. I believe the developer walked off the project in 2019 after you issued stop work orders. I'd like to know why it hasn't been classified as blighted. Also, 1000 C Street is currently classified as vacant on the OTR records, but it listed as residential in 2020. I'll bet you can't tell me why. So would you get back to me on that?
Sure.
Was that yes? You'll get back to me on that?
I'll get back to you on every question that you've asked about specific properties. The 1000
Okay.
Street, I think, is one of those properties where the owner appealed to RIPTAG and RIPTAG said.
Well, no, I don't want speculation here. I don't know that they appealed in 2020 or appealed their 2020 tax. So I'd like to know why that property was classified as remains as a class 1 for tax year 2020. The gentleman from Office of Tax and Revenue, I asked if you would get back to me about 1000 C Street. So there's a history of this property owner coming in to RIPTAC and appealing. Do you know what the status is of the tax assessment at this point? I believe the property owner owes $138,815.
That is correct. Currently, I think, Chairman, you summarized it. We are showing 2020 as class 1. All other years are reflecting class 3. We do not have a record of the classification appeal at our fingertips, so we can't answer that question, unfortunately.
Okay, would you get back to me with regard to whether there's anything in your records that the property owner is challenging or did challenge the tax bill I'll say within the last several years?
Yes, Chairman. What I can share is that the property tax lien was sold on last year's tax sale. So we do have a lien holder who purchased the lien.
For 1000 C Street.
That is correct.
If you could provide a fuller history after, follow up this hearing. And I also mentioned that I wanted to ask you about 3228 Hyatt Place and 2920 Ontario. Those are both apartment buildings, and although they're owned by different LLCs, the same individual is behind both LLCs. Both are finally listed as blighted. The two properties together owe $330,000 in taxes. I believe that's because they were reclassified as blighted. Can you tell me if there's anything going on there with regard to the property owner trying to appeal?
So on 3228 Place, what I see in our record that the property owner is trying to establish a payment arrangement in order to pay the outstanding real property taxes. This record dates back to July 29, 2021. After that, I do not have any additional information as far as if we have any classification appeal on file at this time.
So the owner of 3228 Hyatt is seeking a payment plan, or back in July was?
That is correct. At that time, the balance was $80,000.
Well, it's now 177,000.
That is correct.
What about 2920 Ontario?
And Mr. Chairman, this would be Northwest, correct?
What's that? Yes, Northwest. 2920 Ontario Road, Northwest.
So the balance is, as you may already know, it's $161,000. And I do see a lot of correspondences going back and forth within DCRA and or administration regarding the classification change. Yeah, I don't see anything specific to any type of appeal on my record, Mr. Chairman.
Or payment plan, same individual behind this property is Hyatt Place.
No record under the case. But we can certainly do in-depth research to see if there was any online submission or attempt to submit a payment plan request.
Mr. Trompa, do you know anything about either of these properties, whether the property owner is doing anything to get out of the classifications, since there's a long history, particularly with Ontario Road, of DCRA determining that it's blighted and then the property owner somehow gets it changed to vacant?
Not at my fingertips.
Would you check, please? And follow up?
As far as if there's any pending, like
Yeah.
Yes.
What I've learned is that DCRA will sometimes, like 1000 C Street, classify it as vacant, and the property owner then comes in and DCRA changes the classification. Or the DCRA will classify it as vacant and the property owner will go to RIPTAC, which I don't think has happened at C Street for about 5 years. And then DCRA doesn't advocate before RIPTAC and it gets, you know, this 1000 C Street, to me as director is the poster child of what DCRA doesn't do. So the curtains have been drawn on that building for years. If you go by, it looks the same today as it did yesterday, as it did last year, as it did the year before. It is such a joke. The community, there's a Twitter account devoted to this building, you know that, and because it's just been so flagrant. And the reason why I say this is the poster child is because I think about it. When was the last time DCRA checked with the Postal Service to see if any mail's been delivered there? When's the last time DCRA checked with its sister agency, DPW, to see if any trash has been picked up? When's the last time DCRA checked with the utilities to see if the utilities have been used in any measurable amount? Something more than leaving a light bulb on, something like there being somebody living in the property. And it's so clear that there's nobody living there. And yet, every time the property owner has said, no, there's somebody living there, the property owner wins. No mail, little or no water, little or no electricity, no trash, but somehow manages to convince whomever that it's occupied.
And it's not this area that they are convincing, Chairman. This is a property that.
That's not correct, because Director, when I got the 10-year history from OTR last year, the classification was being changed repeatedly, and that wasn't by RIPTAC. And there are only three agencies that can change.
Here. I'm not saying DCRA is the only actor here, and this is a property that you've talked about a lot of times, and this is a property where DCRA could have done better in the past. At the same time, there are avenues available to a property owner and who has taken advantage of it, because that's just what the law allows. So following this, I'll take another look at it, but I think it's not unfair for this to be characterized as this is all DCRA's ongoing?
For 30 years, that property has been vacant. And I believe for 6 months out of those 30 years, it's paid the vacant property tax rate. RIPTAC was the one that decided to change it to class 1 several years, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But DCRA did a poor job of advocating. If I remember correctly, the RIPTAC decision said that the DCRA did not present much of a case. I don't have the decision in front of me, but it was pretty bad. Now that's long before you became the director. So you could say that was RIPTAC, but there's a long history here, and there are only 3 entities that can change the classification: DCRA, OTR, and RIPTAC. So my question is for you to follow up and tell me if there's anything going on with that property in terms of the property owner who owes, who has a long history of getting around the vacant property tax rate. Mr. Bessonnier, what happened last year, meaning calendar year 2021, with the tax sale? There was supposed to be a tax sale on vacant properties in the fall. Did that happen?
Yes, Chairman. Yes, it did.
Can you tell me anything more about it? You mentioned 1000 C Street was in tax sale last fall?
That is correct. So last fall, October 13 and 14, we had our tax sale event at OTR, and the 1000 C property actually was purchased by a well-known big lien holder. So that lien currently is probably will be up for a foreclosure lawsuit by the lien holder unless it's redeemed prior to.
But the redemption period is how long?
The redemption period, the property owner can redeem all the way up to the judgment. So that could take anywhere from 3 to 4 years. But at least I think on the plus side, this could end up now at the foreclosure lawsuit. And to your point, this will motivate the property owner to pay the taxes or do something with the property.
How soon does the foreclosure sale have to occur?
The foreclosure, it is required after the tax sale that they can, the lien holder can file a foreclosure 6 months after the event. So this was in October 13, 14, the event. So 6 months from that date when they can file, and they have to file within a year. So it's between, minimum 6 months and up to a year, they need to file a foreclosure lawsuit.
And then it still can take, you said 4 years. Why? Just because the courts are slow, or is that in the process?
Yeah, it's a court process. Unfortunately, it is out of the Office of Tax and Revenue hand at that point, and it becomes a court matter. Yes.
Okay. I think the headline here, though, is that they're actually, the property actually might be foreclosed. You may not think it's a headline, but I can assure you that there are people who are following the property because there is a Twitter account. Actually, I'm tempted to see if I can find it.
Mr. Chairman, you had an earlier question. Regarding tax bills when the classification is updated in your tax database. If we issue an updated tax bill, and the answer is yes. I had a poor audio connection earlier, so I couldn't answer, but the system automatically, the tax database that is automatically generates a corrected tax bill when the classification changes go into effect.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Bonds, I kind of used some time, so if you want some more questions.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is that I really want to understand, and I think you sort of got to this, Chairman. I wanted to understand what it takes to bring final resolution to these properties that have been in a category of flux back and forth, taking advantage of the system, as Mr. Director Shopler indicated, and it continues to be a blight in the community. And so I think you were talking a little bit about it. And so I wanted to really get an understanding of what does it really take to bring to finale these properties so that we can remove this sore from the community if the property is falling down. I understand the inspection process. I understand the exception process, but is there something that happens, like for instance, the building on Florida Avenue Northeast that just literally caved in? Does it take something like that to really bring to end some of these properties, these 177 blighted properties that may get to that point of deterioration and therefore be a sore in community, or worse still, may injure someone? Do you feel you have a role in that, tax and revenue office? I feel that, I know that DCRA has a role in it, but just wondering. I'm trying to connect the dots, trying to help people in community understand that what happens with our tax rolls does in fact affect them in their neighborhood. No.
Yeah, Councilmember Ms. Bonds. So the answer is sort of probably can be answered from different angles, but for our office, for OTR standpoint, it is, we want to make sure that the properties are put back to a tax roll, right? So when someone stops paying taxes on a property and it's just start accumulating a large amount of debt, that's not in the best interest of the district, and it's not in the best interest of the neighborhood, and overall the services that is being provided from that tax revenue. So our objective is, and we are committed to continuously remain available with DCRA to work side by side to try to ensure that our tax rolls are accurate and correct. Unfortunately, when it comes to class 3 and 4, we rely on the administrator, and we try to put in guardrails to ensure that the classifications are accurate. We try to have constantly, we do have monthly standing meetings with DCRA where we review operational items, and we continue to do that as we move forward. And then we also have some file exchanges beside the daily batch update that was shared by Director Chapran. We also have twice a year, right before each billing, we cross-reference all records with DCRAs in an effort, once again, to ensure that the tax rolls are accurate, and in fact, the taxpayers are receiving the correct tax bills in order to, try to facilitate this process and help with the overall safety and health of the district residents. And as far as the property valuations, that would be also one angle where certainly it's, as we already know from district residents, nobody wants a property that is negatively impacting their property values, right? Because it's right next door or across the street or a next street over. So we are committed, and we will continue to explore all venues and options that whatever we have in our disposal to work with DCRA.
Okay, well, I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective of a taxpayer has appealed to OTR and therefore are eligible for the second level of appeal, which is to the Real Property Appeals Commission. And they get there and somehow they end up with a more favorable situation. So I wonder, what is it that is presented in the second appeal, or when they get to the commission, that was missed in the bringing the case to your shop first?
So just as a clarification, if I may comment, classification 3 and 4 appeals it does not go through OTR's RIPTEC process. Maybe Director Chopra can elaborate further, but we have no direct knowledge of those appeals, what's being filed, what's being appealed, because once again, it flows through directly to DCRA. On the other hand, we are certainly handling the classification 1 residential and classification 2 commercial appeals. That's within OTR, but not the 3 and 4.
Mr. Chopler, you have any feedback on that?
I'll speak to the classification appeal process. Picking the blight example, if somebody wants to appeal the blight determination that DCRA has made, they appeal to DCRA. And if we deny that, then they go to RIPTAG. So RIPTAG is an arbiter of blight classification. But I think the broader question that you may be getting at is what else can be done when the system's checks and balances gives people a favorable outcome. One point of view is that's just the way it is. Another point of view is we can explore non-litigious channels to incentivize the return of properties to productive use. But to do so, we should also recognize what actually works. And that is over 60% of properties get returned to productive use because of the existing framework of DCRA's inspections, classifications, what OTR does, and how the appeal process also plays out. So we can throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, proverbially. But if somebody can create the right incentives, then the private sector can respond, unless, of course, the government wants to go and take over certain properties and redevelop them. There's a limited scope for that, and that's what DACD does with certain properties. But this is a very complicated issue, and maybe some point down the line, there will be a financing arrangement or some type of like subsidy or some type of like incentive that would encourage people to just dispose of the properties they have, that they are not doing anything about it.
Well, you know, the property that the chairman was discussing with you, several of them, seemed to me they're at that point where we should have a better purpose for them other than the continuation of this huge tax bill. And if I understand OTR, it didn't come through them. The decisions haven't come through them because of their classification. Am I correct, Mr. Benzeri?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so it is within your shop. And so I'm looking for suggestions. How do we move this property that continues to be classified as, I guess, vacant? But it's really been vacant for 20 years.
I think we can have an offline conversation about various things. I don't want to be spitballing here in a roundtable forum, but a discussion about, okay, what are potential innovative ways to spur or accelerate the return of our properties to productive use? And what are the choices that will come with it?
You know, I asked this question in earnest because I was around when we had a preponderance of vacant units in the 70s, the 80s in particular, in certain neighborhoods, particularly the downtown neighborhood, and over where I live near North Capitol Street. And these were properties that had been abandoned, basically. And some were had exorbitant tax bills, but somehow we came up with a way to, as you say, Mr. Shopler, incentivize the community to do something with these properties. I think some of the properties turned into where the government acquired them. And therefore was able to renovate them and make them available to households. And I'm just wondering if that is something that we need to look closer at, short of eminent domain. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Sort of eminent domain, I would think getting the private sector to address the issue is a worthy discussion. Maybe we gotta ask developers, big developers, small developers, what are some of the challenges you have in sort of like acquiring a property when you are negotiating with somebody else? Is it the blight classification that scares away banks? How can you help address the housing situation? The same way we came up with like, inclusive rezoning. What are some of the things that we could do in other areas? If there's a block that is full of vacant properties, can there be a seed investment in one particular one to turn it into like a community space and incentivize others to move in? There are just so many things that can be explored, but ultimately it's going to come down to what is the city prepared to fund as like a pilot or a starter program to evaluate and go from there.
All right, thank you, Chairman. I'm sure I've exhausted my time.
Yeah, and I had one follow-up question, but I want to say this, the questions you were pursuing, they're legitimate questions, but they let DCRA off the hook. As a matter of policy, this council adopted in the early 1990s that there would be a vacant property tax. And the idea is it's one of the tools to incentivize people to keep their property in use. How well is DCRA implementing that tool? That's the purpose of this hearing. And to talk about other strategies is to, in the context of this hearing, let DCRA off the hook. I had one other question for Mr. Bethany. For C Street, 1000 C Street, they currently owe $138,815. I'm guessing that the tax sale last year was for a lesser amount.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Chairman. The tax sale amount was $133,279.31.
$133,000.
That is correct.
To redeem, does the property owner have to pay the total amount due?
That is correct. Yes, they need to pay the full total balance, whatever they will do in the future at the time when they're trying to redeem. So they're going to pay. They have to bring the account under $100.
Okay, so even though the tax sale was for less, they still have to pay the full amount to redeem.
That is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Trappa, you are going to get back with regard to what DCRA knows about 1000 C Street Northeast, and that is whether there's anything going on with appeals, anything going on with reclassifications, whatever the property owner may be doing with your agency. You're also going to get back with regard to the construction exemption for the Cornelius Donnelly houses at 5504 Nebraska and 3216 Morrison. The issue there is that there's apparently a construction exemption again, and no construction work being done. You also are going to get back with regard to what the longest time it has been to appeal a tax classification to DCRA within DCRA within the past 12 months. And you're also going to get back with regard to the foreign missions vacant property task force. I don't have that correct name, but there's only one community or one task force that deals with foreign mission vacant properties.
Chairman, a point of clarification. My statements were about the interagency group, not the foreign properties task force.
You confused me. I asked you when they met and you said you'd have to get back to me.
Yes, but in that response, I was referring to the interagency working group. So if the question is about the foreign missions, it is noted, and I'll make sure we address that specifically.
Yeah, the question was about the foreign missions.
Okay.
And you also were going to get back with regard to 5732 Fifth Street and that property, which is missing the rear of the house, is been classified all these years as vacant instead of blighted. I believe those were the items that you were going to get back to me on. And the gentleman from OTR, we're going to get back with regard to just more information on Hyatt Place, Ontario Road, and C Street, whether, what's going on there that you know of with regard to possible appeals or objections or reclassifications or whatever.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank each of you. Councilmember Bonds, I want to thank you for hanging in here till the end. So that's going to bring this hearing a roundtable to a close. Again, this has been a roundtable on vacant and blighted properties in the District of Columbia. The record will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, February 8th, 2022. The time is now 6:45 in the afternoon, and this hearing or roundtable is adjourned.